IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Tuesday. Hope everybody's week is going swimmingly, and we have another loaded show coming your way this week. We have a really important topic of discussion in part one of today's show. Every national championship contending team needs their stars, and obviously there's one proven star on this roster, and that's Leonard Moore on defense. Today, we are talking about the offense and how there's stars that need to emerge on offense. Some are closer than others. We talk about some other possibilities and some sleepers that could break out and emerge into stars as well. In part two of today's show, we're going to be breaking down more about Notre Dame's opponents. We've been ranking top defenses, top offenses. Now it's time to talk about the best opposing quarterbacks they're going to face. Talk about some wild cards that have the opportunity to move up into it, but then we're going to be working back to front, 5-1, who are the best. And then we're continuing giving an overview, really a preview of Notre Dame's regular season schedule. Up next is their fifth opponent of the regular season, the North Carolina Tar Heels. And Brian, we're taking home everything today with the daily mailbag geared towards the topics that we're discussing this afternoon. So another really fun and loaded show today.
Yeah, it is. It is. And just to give everybody a little bit of a programming note, we will not have a show tomorrow. Trevor and I are going to take the day, and it's going to be a magazine day. So we're going to get put our final touches on the layout, start really zeroing in on all the writing. So we're gonna have a lot of meetings on that. And so for those who don't know, we are releasing the first ever Irish Breakdown season preview for Notre Dame. This year it will be for premium members only. So if you're ever needed a reason to sign up for the message board, that would be it. It's going to be a digital magazine. And so we're getting to that kind of that crunch time of where we want to be able to wrap all this up and get it out to you guys here as soon as possible. So we're going to take tomorrow for a work day for that. So we're kind of combining our normal Wednesday show and a couple others, and that's where some of this stuff comes from. So we're very, very excited about that. But I think this also kind of kicks into where we're going to start getting even more into some of the nitty gritty of this season in this team, Trev. And we talk about this every year, and it's absolutely true, is to win a championship, you need star power. And I would argue that you need star power on both sides of the ball. Have there been teams that haven't had stars on both sides of the ball that won championships? Yeah, but they're very, very rare. And there's exceptions of, well, there's star power on the sideline, or in the case of 2023 Michigan, they're giant cheaters, which helps them play to their full potential and beyond, So I say somewhat jokingly, but even that Michigan team in 23, where we looked at the offense and say, well, did they really have a star on offense that year? I don't think JJ McCarthy was a star. I don't think Blake Corum was a star. I don't think that Roman Wilson was a star. You could argue maybe Colston Loveland, but I don't know that he wasn't like Brock Bowers for them, But what I think you saw in those games was there were players that played like stars in all of their big games. And you need a little bit of both. You need the stars from the standpoint of, okay, yeah, that's a Jeremiah Love, Michael Floyd, Golden Tate, type star at the perimeter position, or a Quentin Nelson, Ronnie Stanley, Liam Eichenberg, Mike McGlinchey, Zach Martin type of star on the offensive line. And the more of those you have, the easier it is to win. And we look at the Notre Dame 2016, there are stars on defense. There's at least one for sure star on defense, and several others that we think are very close. I think on offense, Trev, it's a little bit of a different story. And I don't know that there's a given proven star right now on offense, which we'll discuss, but there needs to be, because let's count it down. This past year, you look at Indiana, they had a Heisman Trophy winner quarterback. They had a first-round draft pick at receiver, and he wasn't even their best receiver. They had all-American offense left tackle. Ohio State, stars abound. You had obviously Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka. You had two 1,000-yard running backs that were high draft picks, and then your quarterback, who was not a star, played like one in the postseason. You had an elite All-American star up front on the offensive line in Donovan Jackson. You look at the year before that, again, we talk about the Michigan team, and that's the anomaly for various reasons. 22 Georgia, that's an easy one. You had Brock Bowers. I think Stetson Bennett also kind of played a little bit like that in 2022. 21 Georgia, again, Brock Bowers. Those teams had at least one star player. 2020 Alabama had multiple. 2019 LSU had multiple on offense. So, 2018 Clemson had 4 stars on offense. You go down the line, Trev, and every one of these teams had that type of big-time star player, with the exception of arguably Michigan in 2023. And I think a Michigan fan might argue that, Blake Corum that year was a star. He had 27 rushing touchdowns. I think he was a really good player. He wasn't in the star. And what we mean by star is someone that can literally take over a game, and even the biggest games, who can truly dominate his position. And when I look at Blake Corum, Trev, I don't know that a guy that averaged 4.8 yards per carry is necessarily someone that I would call a star. The 27 touchdown is a byproduct of play calling and a good line, and him being a good player. But I don't know that I'd call that like star production. Roman Wilson, arguably, again, 48 catches, 789 yards, 12 touchdowns. Pretty good season, but like, is he the same kind of dominant player that like a Brock Bowers was, a T. Higgins was, a Justin Ross was? I think that's debatable. But what you did have, however, is a lot of pretty good players that stepped up and played like stars when they needed them. And that's the very minimum of what you have to have. But I think in this era of the 12-team playoff, I think you need stars, because you only got to win 2 games back then. Now you got to win 3 or 4. And the more games you play, the more opportunity there is for you to face a team that matches up well against you. And that's why I think star power has to emerge for Notre Dame on offense in 2026. I think there's talent potential we'll talk about, but I would argue that right now, of what we know about players, not what they can be, but what they have been, I don't think there is a star on the Notre Dame offense yet.
Yeah, I agree completely. A lot of potential there, but what do we talk about all the time? When we start talking about potential, that means sometimes in certain scenarios, the production doesn't match. With some players, that's more valid than others. But I'm with you completely. Notre Dame needs all different types of stars. I mean, I think of the 2015 Alabama team. There was no bigger star in college football in 2015 than Derrick Henry, the Heisman Trophy winner, rushed for 2,000 yards. Who was one of their stars in the postseason? It was O.J. Howard, who went absolutely nuts in the postseason. Back-to-back years, Clemson wanted nothing to do with him. So you need all different types of stars to break out. But Notre Dame's one certified star on offense is now with the Arizona Cardinals. You can argue their second certified star, Jadarian Price, is now with the Seattle Seahawks.
Which I think is a fair argument.
Absolutely.
When he was on the field, he played like one.
Game changer, to your point.
Right.
Yes, agree completely. And so Notre Dame's offense is in need of somebody to step up. Now, here's the bright side. This is not going to be a show around, I just don't even know who could possibly be. We need this guy to perform above his God-given ability. No, they have a lot of candidates. And there you could even argue there's going to be some players that we don't talk about on today's show that could emerge as a star. But there's a lot of potential, but they need to start emerging. That's for sure.
Yeah, there's no question. And that's going to be the key, Trev. And what type of emergence are we talking about? I think that's the final piece to this puzzle as we talk big picture before we really dive into the specifics of who those kind of players are, is kind of getting into, okay, is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 1, but 3 or 4 others play like it at times? Is it 2, but 2 or 3 others play like it at times? If you get beyond 2 stars, you're going to be elite. I think, unless it's like 2 receivers and your quarterback is like Davis Warren or something like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, no disrespect, but like there's going to be some limitations to when it can be. But to your point, Trev, it's how many? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it a certain number consistently and others occasionally? That's what we're going to dive into. And then as we kind of go through these, what we'll do also is we'll discuss what we think the guys that we're talking about, what will they be? Will they be consistent stars, occasional stars, whatever they're going to be? I think we're going to add a little bit of that into it as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let's dive into it, Trev, and let's talk about who we think the stars will be for this Notre Dame team in 2026. Because I'll say this pretty confidently, I'll be shocked if they don't have at least 1 or 2 stars emerge this year. And I mean like legit stars. I mean like All-American players. I keep saying like Athlon had their All-American team. And don't they have like Notre Dame like 3rd or 4th in the preseason, but only 1 first team All-American. When was the last time a team finished a year in the top 4 and only had one first team All-American? I'd love to know when the answer to that was. Somebody's going to actually look it up, like 2025, or something like that, But like you just don't get that a lot. So, but I also understand why no one on offense is already a preseason first team All-American because of what we just said. They have not established themselves as that type of player. But certainly a lot of candidates. And of course, it starts at the quarterback position, Trev.
When you talk about potential star power, you start talking about FanDuel's predicted favorite to win the Heisman Trophy this year, and that's quarterback C.J. Carr. He's somebody that is garnishing a lot of attention this offseason. We talked about it multiple times on this show, Brian, that it's this is the most offseason attention we've seen a Notre Dame quarterback get since, Brady Quinn from 05 to 06. I don't know if Jimmy Clausen was generating this much buzz from 08 to 09.
He was going into 07, but there wasn't the same kind of buzz about him going into 09 that there was coming out of high school because the Notre Dame team wasn't very good. Yeah, agree.
Unfortunately, but excuse me, that came out of nowhere. When you start talking about a quarterback like C.J. Carr, he is not just a player only in our opinions that we think is on the verge of breaking out. They just wrapped up things with the Manning Passing Academy. I know Todd McShay had a lot to say about C.J. Carr's performance. ESPN has gone out to say that, the Notre Dame is number 1 in their future power index ranking for how they're recruiting in the current state of their quarterback room. I think ESPN also said that C.J. Carr was the top returning quarterback in all of college football earlier this offseason.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to be an eventual, first-round NFL draft pick, probably in the top 10 by a lot of major outlets and draft analysts. So a lot of the attention is, I think, warranted on C.J. Carr's part. But the point of the show is he has to now go out and show why he's garnishing a lot of that attention.
Yeah, I do want to talk about a little bit the Manning stuff from yesterday, Trev, because I did think that was interesting. And to follow up what we said yesterday, what a guy does in shirts and shorts at a camp should not really change your opinion of who you think he is as a player. If you don't think a guy handles pressure well, I don't really give a rip what he does in shorts and the t-shirt. And Todd McShay said that, like there's no defense there. He was simply talking about what I think McShay's excitement was with CJ Carr was, I don't know that he realized the arm talent that CJ Carr has for a couple reasons. Number one is you watch him as a redshirt freshman and his arm has gotten stronger. As we pointed out when we were at the pro day and as we pointed out throughout the spring, his arm has gotten stronger. Shocker. A kid who's gone from 19 to 20 is a little bit stronger and a little bit more physically mature than he was the year before. That's human nature for most people. Not everyone stops growing in the 8th grade, Trev, or 5th grade. But when you look at CJ Carr, I also think that he was somewhat protected to a degree in last year's offense because of the presence of Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. You got Jimmy Clausen stuck in my head. And we didn't necessarily see him use his full bag physically. And then when he did, it was occasionally. He'd hit an occasional post right over the top, and they didn't really let him do that more frequently. Well, this spring, we saw them do that a lot more frequently, and Todd McShay's not at all the spring practices, or I don't know that he was in any spring practices. So I like the fact that he comes into this more of like, hey, I'm trying to evaluate guys. And he's looking at it like this is kind of like a pro day type of thing. But the other thing he talked about is I think this is where I do think people's opinions can legitimately change about CJ Carr. He talked a lot about CJ mentally, how he is like wicked smart and how he's getting the young kids lined up and he's talking through defenses and things like that. He's lining up on defense and he's like mimicking what a defensive player would do. And then he talked about how, Peyton Manning would, whenever he wanted to kind of show something, he'd be like, hey, CJ, come over here and help me out. And that kind of tells you a little bit of something. And so I think it's some of those things that people recognized and saw from him this week where you and I are kind of looking at it like, no, we've been telling you all that for a while, so that was, that was a little bit of nice. Okay. Yeah. I'm glad that somebody else is seeing it. Right. It's nice to see that. But the other thing is, like, it is good to see that we're not the only ones that saw that his arm has more juice in it now than it did a year ago, because he's getting older and he's getting, stronger. And so that's something that I was very pleased to see. But it really just kind of, what was the expression you used, Trev? Like it was confirmation,
Validating.
like validation of like the opinion we already had. And to a degree it is. It shouldn't necessarily change your opinion, big picture, about the kind of season he's going to have. And I don't, and Todd McShay was very clear. Like, this doesn't have anything to do with what I think he's going to go down in the season. This is just evaluating his physical tools. And then you got to go out this season and carry it out. There's a couple validations in there. He talked a lot about how talented CJ Bailey and Malik Washington were. The three players he was most raved about: CJ Carr, CJ Bailey, and Malik Washington. And I was like, well, yeah, I've been trying to tell y'all. You know what I mean? But he also had some interesting things to say about Kamaro Taylor, but get into that another time. But I think that's the thing for me is, like, people are starting to come to the realization that, hey, CJ Carr might actually be the best quarterback in college football, or at least have a chance to be the best quarterback in college football. So what does that do with the conversation that we're having? Well, it's okay. Yeah, it's great that he's doing well in the Manning camp and all that, but that doesn't have anything to do with what he has to do when he has to climb, the pocket, or avoid a pass rush, or, read a coverage where they're trying to mask and all those type of things. We all know he can sit there and look phenomenal in shorts, and we know that he can have his moments on the field too, which he did as a redshirt freshman, in not only breaking the school's passer rating record, but like obliterating it. The previous record was 161.4. He goes over 168. And Jimmy Clausen had the best season I've ever seen in Notre Dame quarterback. As a pure passer, yeah, it's debatable. CJ Carr destroyed the passer rating he had from last year. Had almost a full yard per attempt, in that regard. So those are all things I look at, Trev, and say, hey, man, this is where you have to be in order to get to that point. But now it's like, okay, now carry this into the fall. And there's a debate in our guy Andre Tonsel, who is, really love that Andre's part of what we're doing. He brought up in Twitter, he's like, hey, I'm tired of people talking about how CJ Carr's got to carry this team. And I'm like, I'm not tired of talking about that, because he's going to need to do that. That doesn't mean that he's in. If they win the title, it's just because of CJ Carr. And he's John Elway from the 80s, where he's taken this mediocre team. But look, you look at teams that have won titles in recent years, their quarterbacks played at a high level in the postseason for the most part. Because, and the reason that's even more important this year is you look at the top teams in college football. They all have really talented quarterbacks that your defense is going to have to contend with. Wouldn't it also be nice if your quarterback gave those teams' defenses a lot to contend with as well? There is a level of, mano a mano. CJ Carr's not facing Julian Sayin. He's facing the Ohio State defense and vice versa. But him outplaying Julian Sayin is going to give Notre Dame a better chance to win that football game. That's just a fact. And so it's even more important in this particular season, in my opinion, that CJ Carr does take the step that you and I know he's capable of, and honestly think he's going to take. Like, this isn't like a G, he can, but I'm not sure. I fully expect CJ Carr to become a star player this year. But the reality is they're going to need it. At the very least, they're going to need it in some of the bigger games, where it doesn't mean he has to go out and throw for 450 yards. But you got to play good football. You got to get your offense up and down the field. You've got to make the right decisions. You've got to know when to throw it away, when to take your shot, when to do this, when to play at a high level. There were games in the postseason, Trevor, where Fernando Mendoza didn't put up big numbers, but man, he was money when they needed to make a play. He made a play. And that's where CJ Carr's got to be this year. And because he's going to be going against other quarterbacks that have that same ability, or at least comparable ability. But maybe they have a slightly better receiving core. Maybe they have a slightly better running back room. Maybe they have a slightly better defense. And that means he's going to have to even play above what, another player does. I was getting ready to say Arch Manning. I'll be super shocked if Texas's defense is better than Notre Dame's. Like, we're going to be having a problem. Houston, we have a problem if that's the case. But that's the point, Trev. So it not only do we think CJ Carr is capable of being a star this year, you and I predict that he will be a star this year. But I'll take it even a step further. They need him to be a star this year.
Without a doubt. I can't tell you the last time a college football team won a national championship in spite of their quarterback. A lot of people bring up, 2015 Alabama had Derrick Henry. Fair enough. Jake Coker didn't turn the ball over in the postseason in the college football playoff. He threw for over 600 yards and 4 touchdowns, no picks. You need guys in big games. Now, what are we saying here? We're not saying that CJ has to carry the team against Rice or Michigan State, or because Notre Dame's the level of talent on the roster overall is such that they don't have to be that. But on the road against BYU, at home against Miami, at home against SMU, and then when you get into the postseason, that's when you need those stars to be that. So there is some valid points to when people say he doesn't have to carry him for 15 games. Sure, we can get into and dive into the weeds of, who could break out in this game against, Wisconsin and North Carolina on the road. All fair. But in the biggest moments where it mattered, that's why everybody was so upset that Jeremiah Love only touched the ball 10 times last year against Miami. He was your star, and he wasn't able to be a factor in that game. That narrative changed the following game when they played Texas A&M. And then that was not the case when they were at home against USC. That was not the case when they were on the road against Pitt. And so Notre Dame needs their quarterback to do it. But Brian, to your point, he's not alone. He's not the only player that we're talking about today. We're not, cut. We're done with the show for today. We talked about CJ Carr. They're going to need the big boys up front to help out too.
Who can be a star? CJ Carr. Who else? That's it. Everybody else is just kind of okay. He's not going out there with the 07 offensive line and the I don't even want to say it, like it seems disrespectful, but like the 2013 running back room, or like the 2024 receiver room, which is solid but not great. I mean, we're not, what was it, 2013? There was a year where the tight end room was just like, oh my goodness. No, it was 2015 when Durham got hurt. It was like Alize Mack, and that was kind of it. Who's a true freshman. Like, you're not in that situation, but at the same time, what CJ Carr has to do this year is prove that he's an elevator. He has to prove that he can make the people around him better. I think like John Elway was an elevator. It didn't mean that Terrell Davis was a mediocre player that John Elway turned into a Hall of Famer. It means Terrell Davis had great talent, and John Elway, being his quarterback, helped him reach his full potential. Same thing with like Rod Smith and Shannon Sharp. Like, an elevator is not just you turn average players into good players, but it's like your ability helps that guy maximize his ability. And that's also part of what CJ Carr needs to do is your performance is going to make everybody else around you better or not. And your performance needs to be in such that it will. Again, these are things that we expect CJ to do this year. We have full confidence he's going to do that, but it's also because this is what we do. We break things down, right? That's literally the name of the show. You have to point these things out, because while we may think he's going to do it, he now has to then go prove that he can do it. And the reason we start off with CJ Carr also, not just because he's the starting quarterback, but there's also the element, Trev, that if he steps up and plays to his potential, some of these other potential star players we're going to talk about are then going to have a much better opportunity to play to their full potential.
Without a doubt. And I think that conversation starts with the big boys up front, talking about Anthony Knapp and Gerby Lambert. These are two guys that, one, I am amazed at the lack of notoriety that they are getting this preseason, especially Gerby Lambert. That one is different conversation for a different day. But those are two pieces along the offensive line that have the opportunity to step up into stardom. Both are returning starters from last year's offensive line. Anthony Knapp has 27 career starts under his belt. Gerby Lambert now has 12 career starts under his belt and is going into his redshirt sophomore season. And in the starting lineup, he's probably the most physically gifted guy. We could talk Will Black or if Jags comes back. I understand all that. But as far as physically gifted talent with the experience, Gerby Lambert holds that crown. Those are two guys that Notre Dame will have to have emerge as stars this upcoming season as well.
Yeah, I think they're definitely both capable of being stars. I would argue, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I don't know that they both need to play at a star level all year. I do think getting one of them to play at that level is important, and then the other one just has to be pretty good. Because when I think star level, I don't mean – so, like, here's an example of what's a star and what's not. Joe Alton 2022 was really good. He showed star potential, but I wouldn't necessarily put him in the same category as like 2017 McGlinchey, 2015 Ronnie Stanley, or even 2020 Liam Eichenberg. And I've said this before. I think Liam Eichenberg's 2020 was the most steady left tackle season we saw from a Notre Dame left tackle since Zach Martin. And that's the thing about like Zach Martin and Liam Eichenberg compared to like Stanley and McGlinchey is they were never as dominant on their best day in college as those guys were. Now, Zach became that in the NFL, but in Notre Dame, he wasn't like, oh my gosh, did you see him just no moss that D tackle? It was just, I do my job at a high level on every snap. And then like Ronnie and McGlinchey and Alt had the flashes of just brilliance. But you look at Alt in 22, he's very good. If that's all we get from Gerby Lambert this year, I'm okay with that. As long as Anthony Knapp looks like Aaron Banks did in 2020, that kind of thing. But then there's like obviously what Joe Alt was in 2023 when he was a star. I'll live with both of those this year from Gerby Lambert. I can technically live with both of those from Anthony Knapp if they're both that way. But the closer one of them or ideally both of them get to that star level, the better this line is going to be. And I think for Anthony Knapp, it's a big season for him because he's making a transition. And the one transition we all talk about is obvious. We don't need to rehash that. He's playing guard now, a move that we think is going to make him a better player. But there's another transition that Anthony Knapp is making that we haven't talked as much about. He's now the vet in the room. He's now the guy that's going to be counted on for leadership in the room. He's now the third-year starter that's got to bring along the talented young left tackle that's never played a meaningful down at that position in college football like he was in 2024. Fortunately for Will Black, he has an Anthony Knapp inside of him, inside of where he's lining up, where it sounded really terrible, inside of where he's lining up, something Anthony Knapp did not have because they put a redshirt freshman who never played a meaningful down of football inside of his position in 2024. So now Anthony Knapp gets to do for Will Black what no one was able to do for him until when Billy Schrouth stepped in later in the year, and all of a sudden, magically, that's when Anthony Knapp started to play a lot better when he had a veteran presence next to him, which, who knew? But so there's also the level of it's time for you to kind of become that leader as well. Now, Ashton Craig is that player also, but there's no rule that says you can't have multiple leaders. And we've seen Notre Dame have multiple team captains up front. I believe that Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey were both team captains in 2017, I believe. Last year, you had two team captains that were offensive linemen. Like, there's no reason you can't be both. And so, but Anthony Knapp playing to his potential is arguably even more important than Gerby Lambert playing to his, because the closer Anthony Knapp gets to his full potential as a lineman and as a leader, the better that's going to be for Will Black. So he's kind of impacting two positions right now. And that's why I think Anthony Knapp's role this year is going to be vitally important. Vitally important.
Yeah, you and I see the offensive line very much the same. You don't need both of them to be these first-team All-American stars. Would not be upset if that happened. But you don't need both. You need one of them, and I am with you. Given the choice between the two, if I could pick, and I'm not, this doesn't mean I'm going to be upset if it's Gerby Lambert, not Anthony Knapp. But projecting forward through the season, if I could just pick one guy, it would be Anthony Knapp for that reason. I'm with you.
Let's respond to this question real quick from Tristan. He says, "What's the threshold for being a star offensive lineman, men, versus just a very good O lineman?" We kind of explained it, that's why I use Joe Alt as an example, Tristan, because when you look at Joe Alt in 22, he was very good, but the stretches of dominance weren't there. He was a little bit more inconsistent. There was still, hey, this is really his first full year as a starter. He's stronger, but not completely filled out where he'll be. Very good all season, but I would not say that Joe Alt was necessarily dominant for long stretches of the season. He was just kind of steady-ish all year and flashes of dominance. In 2023, however, he was dominant from start to finish. I mean, there was the occasional play here or play there, but I don't remember a game where I was like, yeah, Joe Alt didn't play well today. It was Joe Alt came out of his stance on that one play against R.J. Oben against Duke Slate. He got his foot stepped on, and R.J. Oben beat him around the edge. Like that game was probably the closest to where he didn't play great in that game, but he was great week after week after week, snap after snap, and it wasn't flashes. That level of dominance is just who he became. just a consistent level of dominance. And it doesn't have to be like Joe Alt, unanimous All-Americans, the only type of star power. It just means that there's a level of consistent dominance, not just doing your job necessarily and just solidly, but Liam Eichenberg, when I talked about there's the difference between like a Liam Eichenberg and a Mike McGlinchey from 17 is, they both did their job effectively snap after snap. I'd say McGlinchey was a little bit more, a little bit more of an up and down because he wasn't an incredibly natural pass blocker. But Liam Eichenberg maybe didn't have the moments of, oh my gosh, did you see him just dominate that guy? But he did his job at a very high level, snap after snap. And that's why I say there are different levels to it. And to just use Pro Football Focus data, because like as I say all the time, I don't love their grades, but I do love their data collection. So when you look at for example, like Joe Alt, take Joe Alt, for example, and we'll like take Liam Eichenberg and compare them to some past greats. You look at the job that they did. Joe Alt in his last year, gave up 5 pressures all year. Like that was a pretty high, 99+% rate. But he also was a pretty darn good run blocker. And I think that's where the dominance came into play. Like in 22, his run blocking was steadily good. I never thought he struggled in the run game, but he was really moving people that next year. And so like those are different things I look at. So like Ronnie Stanley in 2015, most people think he was better in 2015 than Liam Eichenberg was in 2020. And Ronnie Stanley gave up 1 fewer pressure on 800. He had 391 or 458 pass blocks. Liam Eichenberg had 455. So same number. Ronnie gave up 1 fewer pressure. Okay, so he must have been better, right? No. Liam Eichenberg gave up 0 sacks and 1 hit on the quarterback, where Ronnie Stanley gave up 3 sacks and 4 hits on the quarterback. There was consistency. So was Ronnie a star? Are you arguing that Ronnie was? No, Ronnie was a star because when Ronnie peaked, Ronnie was dominant. But then there's a little bit of the occasional, okay, dude, what were you doing there? Whereas Liam Eichenberg never reached Ronnie's level of eliteness, just, oh my gosh, but he was always up here. And that either way is star, you're playing like a star. And so there's different ways. And if Anthony Knapp is just Liam Eichenberg this year, great. Like that's same thing with Gerby. They don't have to be Quentin Nelson. It's not Quentin Nelson or you're just okay. It's just a consistent level of dominance, a consistent level of executing your job at a high level. It doesn't mean that you need to no Moss the 3 technique where he's just like, I'm done. I'm done going against this guy like we saw Q do against USC in 2017. It's just I'm doing my job snap after snap at a high level, which means I'm not just stalemating. I'm stalemating him and opening up the hole. I'm not just winning and getting a check for my pass pro. I'm riding that guy out and giving my quarterback a clean pocket and comfortableness to throw the football and do those type of things. It doesn't mean that you got to pass block a guy so physically that his back rocks back. It doesn't have to be that. And so I think that's what the difference is. We're just very good is you're just that. You're just good. You're pretty good all year. You're just not dominant. And that's the difference.
The other piece of that conversation for me as well is you're also, like we talked about CJ Carr, you're an elevator of the other members of the offensive line. I think a prime example of that, Quentin Nelson in 2017 was a star, but he's not just a star because of what he was doing in No Moss, the guy from USC, or because of the crazy blindside pass pro block he had against Georgia. It's for how he also elevated other members of the offensive line. I look at Sam Mustipher. His 2018 season looked a little bit different than it did in 2017. I thought he was a dominant center in 2017. Alongside Quentin Nelson. He had a good year in 2018 because he's a good football player. He's still in the NFL. But the other facet of being a star along the offensive line, in my eyes, Tristan, is you're also able to elevate the guys along with you in the unit. Whereas very good, you're kind of just like, you're a good individual player. Mm-hmm. Like you are a good guy. And so that's how I view that for sure. But Brian, there's not just CJ Carr. It's not just the offensive linemen that have the opportunity to step into this. There's some other possibilities, and a lot of it is out on the perimeter at the skilled positions. You got Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse coming back in this year's wide receiving core. Loads of star power potential there.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, Trevor, because there's a lot of potential here, but this is the position where there's the least amount of certainty that guys become stars. Jordan Faison and this is the one where I don't know that we necessarily need someone to become a star. And so, like, you look at the potential Jordan Faison, Jaden Greathouse. You look at the two portal receivers, Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter. And then there's some other guys we'll talk about here in a little bit, but those are the guys that get most of the conversation. Like, the reason that this is a different type of position for me, because if one of them steps up as a star, that's great. And that's the ideal. You know, at least one of them steps up as a star. Jaden Greathouse becomes a consistent version of what he was in the postseason. You know, Jordan Faison becomes an even more impactful player where he's not just catching a majority of his throws on the quick game and the easy, the stops and the comebacks, but he's actually making more dynamic plays. You know, not that he hasn't made those, but like that's becoming more of the common thing. Like Jordan Faison was really solid last year. He wasn't sniffing star status. He wasn't like, and you'd say, well, he caught more balls than Malachi Fields, and he had more yards than Malachi Fields. And I would argue, yeah, but Malachi Fields was still the better player because he was more impactful. There was more of those big game moments last year from Malachi. And that's where I want to see Jordan raise his game too. And with Greathouse, like, look, we know he can step up and be a stud. We've seen him do it, not just once. It wasn't like fluky game against Penn State, because then what did he have, a fluky game against Ohio State as well? Like, the talent's there. We saw him make some big plays against Louisville that year. We saw him just destroy a Navy DB on the first drive of the game for a big play, and then he would just kind of not get the ball for whatever reason. He's struggled to stay healthy. There's just been a lot of things to keep these guys from you know, they're good players, but are they great players? That's the question. And if one of them can step up and be that guy on a consistent basis, it just makes this offense so much more dangerous. It does. And so when you think about those players, it's like, can one of Greathouse or Faison really take either Faison take your game to another level, or if Faison just repeats what he did last year, but Greathouse comes out and we see more of the Louisvilles, more of the Florida State performances, more of the Penn State and Ohio State performances. Doesn't have to do Ohio State, Penn State every week. Otherwise, his numbers are going to be stupid. Like 80-something catches for like, let me look this up real quick, Trev, because I did the math on this one time, and it was like, yeah, I don't think that's the expectation, that if he doesn't do that, he's not a star, because otherwise, like, we haven't seen a star receiver since like Devontae Smith or something stupid like that. So Greathouse in 2014 had 105 and 128 yards, and you divide that by 2. So if he played in a 12-game regular season, he'd have 1,398 yards. I don't need him to have 1,398 yards. If he does that, yes, he'd be a star. It's more so of, we don't just see that twice late in the year, and then it's mixed in with a bunch of zeros and ones. That's the issue. If he only has 2 games this year where he has over 100 yards, and yet we see a lot of the performances, like against Louisville, 4 for 61 and a touchdown, Georgia Tech 3 for 43, Florida State 5 for 56. If those are more common, and then there's the 2 to 3 of the big games, that's a star in this offense where the ball is going to be spread around. Because if Jaden Greathouse is putting that kind of production together, the reason I think he's capable of being a star player is because when he produces, it's impact plays. It's winning a contested catch. It's converting a third down. It's getting into the end zone. He's been Notre Dame's best, touchdown. He's led the team in touchdown receptions. And the only 2 years where he played 10 or more games, he led the team in touchdown catches. Both years, freshman and sophomore year. So he's very good in the red zone. So the point is, when he does produce, it's impact plays. His contested catch rate in 24 was sick. It was over 80%. I had somebody say this one to me. Well, that's because of the postseason. Like, actually, his contested catch rate was lower in the last 2 games than it was the rest of the season. He just had more opportunities. But we saw that the Georgia Tech game. You remember that game, Trev, where he, you look at his numbers, and he had 3 catches for 43 yards. But one of those catches was a ridiculous back shoulder, contested catch on a slot fade. When that production is consistent, it's impact plays. And that's why I say, if Faison is just what he did, just repeats what he did, and Greathouse is the more consistent player, you've got a stud dynamic 1-2 punch. And then vice versa. If Faison raises his game to that next level, he becomes that consistent, like, dude, this guy's a nightmare because they're throwing him little tunnel screens and he's, which we've seen him do, take a little 3rd and 9 tunnel screen and turn it into a 15-yard gain. Like, we know he can do that. We just don't see him do that enough. And I don't think it's because he's not capable of it. I don't know that they necessarily design enough plays to get him the ball on the move more often. Like, that's part of this is also on the system. But if he raises his level of play, and Greathouse is just the same dude he was 2 years ago, that's still a really good 1-2 punch at receiver. And that's why I think I don't want to talk about a lot this offseason. I don't want to talk a lot about Faison without talking about Greathouse, and I don't want to talk about Greathouse without talking about Faison, because I think the important thing for Notre Dame is they need to both kind of be those guys this year for this offense. And we'll talk about other guys, but and it could be a world where neither are stars at the end of the year in the way that we expect a Jeremiah Smith to be one or a Cam Coleman to be one, or he's an All-American. But if between the two of them, at least one of them is playing at their best on a weekly basis, then I think this receiving core is going to be pretty good. And that's where I say maybe one doesn't become a star, but between the two of them, you're going to get star caliber play all season at some point in time. That's a big thing for me.
That's how I feel about the receiver rotation as a whole. I mean, at the start of the show, we talked about how, you have your solidified guys, and then in the postseason, it's this guy, this game, a different player, a different game. And we've already seen that in 2024. Jordan Faison was wide receiver 1 against Indiana and against Georgia, who was wide receiver 1 against Penn State and Ohio State. So they don't necessarily have to be just one guy where, like, a Jamar Chase in 2019 goes out and wins the Biletnikoff Award. Mm-hmm. But they would have a very similar impact to, again, I've talked about Georgia in 2022 before, with the wide receiving core they had along with Brock Bowers. And so I'm with you completely. It doesn't have to just be one guy. And we can also throw the transfer portal players in that conversation as well as a part of the receiver rotation, and Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter. Both of those players have the opportunity to be standouts in Notre Dame's offense, but it'll be more of a per week basis than the entirety of the season. Wouldn't shock me if the Miami game was the Mylan Graham game. The BYU game was the Jaden Greathouse game. And the SMU game was the Jordan Faison game. And then first round or quarterfinals of the playoffs, it's the Quincy Porter game. Like, it has that type of potential to it.
It does. And I think with these two players, I don't expect either of them to become breakout season-long stars. It's possible, but I don't expect it or predict it. I don't think it's silly to predict it. We've seen this happen at Notre Dame many times. Golden Tate catches 6 balls as a freshman. The next year, he's 58 catches for 1,080 yards and 10 touchdowns. You look at Will Fuller as a freshman, 6 catches for 160 yards and a touchdown. And he goes out the next year and has, 76 catches for 1,100 yards or 1,094 yards and 14 touchdowns, something like that. Equinemi St. Brown catches 1 pass for 8 yards as a freshman in 2015. The next year goes out and 59 catches for 960-something yards and 9 touchdowns in only 12 games. If they play in the postseason, he's over 1,000 yards. It's not out of the realm of, Javon McKinley has 11 career catches in 4 years, and then as a fifth-year senior has a season where he's over 40 catches, over 700 yards, and was clutch for that 2020 team. And so, none of these things are surprises. Miles Boykin did almost nothing in his career of anything meaningful until the LSU bowl game, and then the next year he was their best receiver. That's why I say I don't care a lot about experience of wide receiver. And so, that's asking a lot of it. No, it's not really. We see it all the time at that position. It's asking a lot for an offensive lineman to never play it down, and then redshirt freshman may become a star. That's why it only really usually happens for guys like Quentin Nelson and players like that. But what I think we can hope for and expect from this transfer receiving core is that we see some star performances from them this season. I don't need Mylan Graham to go from 2-year backup to Will Fuller. If it happens, great. I am not wishing it to not happen. If it happens, that's awesome. What I think, though, that we need to see is we just need to see that flash at times. Be a good player all year, but have those 2 to 3, maybe 4 games you're like, dude was on in his. He was getting after it that game. Same thing from Quincy Porter. I don't need Quincy Porter to be Malachi Fields this year. But give me a couple games or a couple plays where we're seeing that. Add that value to the room, because then it becomes so much harder to defend Faison. It becomes harder to defend Greathouse. It becomes harder to defend the tight ends and Aeneas Williams out of the backfield, because now if you try to single up Mylan Graham, Mike Denbrock's going to see that and be like, let's go there, and that's why I think the more they become threats, even if it doesn't result in like that guy's putting up All-American potential, if they become kind of those threats where their talent becomes, and the potential turns into production, at least on some level of, hey, you might have only caught 2 passes here, 1 pass there, 3 the next week, but then boom, 6 for 125, that kind of thing. And the potential's there, the teams see that, then that's all of a sudden now you got to defend that team differently.
Another player on this list for us, Brian, in terms of breakouts, you had briefly mentioned, and that's running back Aeneas Williams, who's stepping into some pretty big shoes, not necessarily having to replace the style of play of Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, but he is replacing Jeremiah Love on the 2 deep and in the starting lineup. He is a player which is kind of twofold with his breakout. He brings a very, very strong pass catching skill set to the backfield. Mm-hmm. And he's also been a productive player that we have seen in big moments. Unlike Quincy Porter, unlike Mylan Graham, not a shot at them. It's just they didn't have the availability to do that because, Jeremiah Smith was in front of them. But we've seen Aeneas Williams perform well in clutch big moments, like the Orange Bowl in the 2024 playoffs. So he's another player that's on star power breakout watch.
He is. The question with Aeneas is, I don't know that he is ready to become a star. I want to see some flashes of it. To me, he's in between like CJ Carr and Mylan Graham in expectations. I don't need him to be Jeremiah Love, but do I need him to have some games where he goes off? Yeah, I do think that's needed, especially early, to where, the first time a team comes out and says, yeah, we're if you want to beat us running the ball, go for it. And then Aeneas just goes off. Or maybe it's Keydron or whatever. But I think Aeneas right now goes into the summer and he'll head into fall camp as the most likely breakout player at the position. I mean, Keydron could certainly do it. The freshman could do it. Nolan could do it. But I think right now Aeneas is the best candidate. And let's say Wisconsin does that. Hey, we're just going to try to stop CJ Carr. And so Aeneas goes for like $145, 7 yards a carry. Great. Because now you have to defend Notre Dame differently. Or if you're just going to all keep saying, yeah, it's fine, we'll make Aeneas Williams beat us. Cool. Then he goes out there and has a monster year. Like, that's possible, Trev. But my thing is, I don't know that he necessarily needs to be a star. We just need to see some star performances. And that goes to a bigger question of, I don't think Notre Dame needs a star at running back this year for the season. They don't need someone to be Jeremiah Love. But I do think that there needs to be some moments where we see that, because I think that's what's needed to keep teams from saying, hey, we're just going to do whatever we can to shut down CJ Carr. What do you think about that, Trev?
Yeah, I agree completely. When his number is called, he's going to have to show out. But I don't think it's going to be a scenario where, every game we're expecting the 90-yard touchdown run like we did with Jeremiah Love, or the 7 broken tackles run that we saw from Jadarian Price, which what felt like was almost on a weekly basis at this point. But there will be multiple teams, especially if the hype around CJ Carr continues to build leading up to September 6th and then throughout the entire regular season. There will be moments where Mike Denbrock is going to have to sit down and say, hey, look, 22, we need you this game. We're going to feed you. We're going to give you 20-plus carries. And obviously, the large part will be Anthony Knapp and Gerby Lambert stepping up like we just got done talking about. But I'm with you. They don't need Aeneas Williams to be a Doak Walker Award candidate to become a star. For him, it will be the moments of they're going to come up against the defense. It's like, hey, we can't let 13 beat us through the air, and he has to take advantage.
Yep, no doubt. I think there's also a couple sleeper prospects, Trev, that I think are less likely, but I'm not ready to say that they're not. And I think one guy is Cam Williams. I think if Cam Williams can And I throw Cam in the Mylan Graham, Quincy Porter category, where I don't need Cam to have a Golden Tate 2008 breakout. I don't need him to have a 2014 Will Fuller breakout or a 2016 Equanimity St. Brown breakout. If he can just have he goes out there and catches 20 to 25 balls and averages over 20 yards a catch and catches 4 or 5 touchdowns, something like that, where when he's out there, he's a big play threat. If you can at least get that minimum from him, I think that changes this offense in a great deal, because I don't care what anybody says, and I actually know people at Notre Dame that agree with this. He's still the most physically gifted player on the roster. He's still the most dynamic weapon on the roster if he could ever put it together. So that's why I say is if there was ever a breakout that and I'll keep saying it, I'm not predicting it. Cam is 100% in show me mode. I don't care what we hear. We'll do our summer intel report, and I promise you that the people I talk to are going to talk about how good Cam looks and how well Cam's playing. And honestly, it's going to be fun to report it, and it kind of get me excited. But at the end of the day, I don't care. I don't care what he does in fall camp, just like I don't care what Micah Gilbert does in fall camp. We've kind of been there, done that with some of these guys. It's I want to see him do it on Sunday night in Green Bay or Saturday afternoons or evenings for the rest of the year. That's the key. But we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention the possibility of a player with his God-given ability having a breakout that is similar to what we've seen in the past. We saw Javon McKinley do nothing for 4 years and become Notre Dame's best receiver. It can happen. It's not unheard of. And so can Cam do that? Yes, he can. Will he? No idea. So I think he's worth mentioning. And then there is one freshman, Trev, that I think is worth mentioning as well. And since that's, I know you want to talk about this one, so we'll let you go into him.
Yeah, it's Ian Premer at tight end, my, I guess, favorite position in football. But when you start talking about physical talent, there's a lot of similarities between Cam Williams and Ian Premer when you start talking about God-given ability. Now, different scenario, because Ian Premer is now walking into his first semester on a college campus versus Cam, who's okay, you are now a junior academically. It's time to get going. Ian Premer is somebody where this is going to be a very crucial summer workout session and fall camp for him, because if it is successful for him, because he's going to be getting his feet under him. I expect him, when we get up there in fall camp, he's going to be swimming the first couple days. But if he can have a similar jump to what Bubba Frazier and Devin Fitzgerald had in the spring, where it's first time we see him, it's yep, that's a true freshman. This is his first time at a college practice. 2, we see him 5 days later, and it's that's a different.
And he gets twice as many practice opportunities. Almost, not quite, but close. You go from 14 to 25 practice opportunities in the spring. In 15, if you include the Blue Gold game, to 25. The other thing, too, is it's not unheard of to see a freshman tight end become that star player. We only got to go back 5 years to see that. Brock Bowers. And I don't even think that Notre Dame needs him to be Brock Bowers. They just, I don't think they need him necessarily at all this year. Need him, meaning if he doesn't come in and ball out as a freshman, they're going to struggle. But it's kind of like with Cam Williams, Trev, to your point. They don't need Mylan Graham to be a star. They don't need Cam Williams to be a star. They don't need Ian Premer to be a star. But if they become that, it changes the game. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention him as a possibility. I think there's 2 others, Trev. One that two brief mention ones, but if Ashton Craig can stay healthy and if he's back to 100% strength and agility and speed and conditioning, he's got a chance to become one of the best centers in college football. He does. He's not there yet. He's got to prove it. And then the other one's Will Black. Can Will Black have sort of that breakout second year which we've seen before when we've seen players become stars? Joe Alt was close to that in 2022. Quentin Nelson was that. Quentin Nelson in 2015 was a monster on that offensive line in 2015. And can Will Black be that in year 2, or is he more of what Ronnie Stanley was as a redshirt freshman, which is you saw flashes of greatness, but then you also this guy still needs a lot of work. The consistency's not there, things like that. So I think that's another one, too, where he's at least – when you talk about a kid that's got his athleticism and his size and length and just God-given talent, you have to at least mention him as a possibility for becoming a breakout star. And then there's lots of guys we can mention. I think those are the most obvious ones, those two offensive linemen. I'm not again. And when we talk about this, it's not, okay, so you guys are predicting the CJ Carr, Anthony Knapp, Gerby Lambert, Jordan Faison, Jaden Greathouse, Mylan Graham, Quincy Porter, Cam Williams, Aeneas Williams, Ian Premer, Ashton Craig, and Will Black are all going to be playing stars. Yeah, they will be when I get in, college football 27 and move everybody up to a 99, sure. But in real life, no, we don't expect all of them to get there or even half of them. But these are the candidates that I think it's where if there are star breakouts this season, it's most likely to come from this group.
Brian, up next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We're diving into Notre Dame's schedule, and we're waiting for the opponent preview. That's coming a little bit down the road on this show. But we've previously ranked the top 5 offenses and the top 5 defenses that Notre Dame is going to face. Now it's time to get in the weeds a little bit and start talking about the top 5 quarterbacks that they're going to face. Contrary to what a lot of people think when they just look at this schedule, big pictures, like everybody's going to suck except for Miami.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of really good individual talent spread throughout this roster. And in some cases, for some opponents, we're going to have to look a little bit deeper to find what those matchups are. But there's going to be some good quarterback play that Notre Dame is going to face in 2026. And I think it's going to bode very well for them come postseason to where they're not going to face a quarterback too much to where they're like, yeah, we just haven't seen that yet. Yeah. If they face Texas and the mobility of Arch Manning, they'll have faced a quarterback in like a Kevin Jennings or a Bear Bachmeier. As far as throwing ability, there's going to be nobody that Notre Dame meets in the postseason that they're just like, yeah, we just haven't seen this type of talent before. Because I think they do face some talented quarterbacks in the regular season.
Yeah, like Trev, there's a lot of talk about Notre Dame's soft schedule and this, and we've said this before. It's overplayed. Is Notre Dame playing a vintage, Lou Holtz, Notre Dame 1989? They play 7 top 15 teams in regular season, or 1988 when they played, what was it like? The end of the year, they beat 3 of the 5, or actually no, in 1988, Notre Dame beat 3 of the top 5 teams in the country. That year, they beat number 2 Miami. They beat number 3 Michigan and number 5 West Virginia at the end of the year. And the only teams that beat Michigan were Miami and Notre Dame, who finished 1 and 2. No, it's not that kind of schedule. We've never said it's that kind of schedule. But to act like this is like 2021, I mean, it's not that either. And that's the frustrating thing. But and part of the reason it's not that is the quarterback play. This is kind of what we've talked about, Trev, is there's a chance that quarterback play on the schedule this year could be very good. There's some quarterbacks we know, and then there's other quarterbacks that we're like, keep an eye on this guy, because some of the optimism that we are going to have is about, hey, I think this team's going to be improved because of who the quarterback is. Or I'm not betting on this guy, but if he can put it all together, he's got a chance to really be an elevator for that football team. And that's something that's going to be very fun to watch this season. Is that if you're someone who wants a good schedule, who wants teams to play to their best. I've never been someone like, I want this guy to be out for Miami and that guy to be out for Miami because I want it to be neat. No, I want them to be at full strength, and that way either you're good enough to beat them or you're not, but at least that way where you still have people that are like, oh, this guy's a great player because he led Notre Dame to a win over number 1 Clemson. Yeah, without Trevor Lawrence and 3 starters. Look what happened like a month later when those guys were all back. Notre Dame got destroyed. Because it was fool's gold. You weren't that good. It just that team couldn't expose you because they were missing, A, B, C, and D. Trevor Lawrence. It was like Trevor Lawrence, Mike Jones, Tyler Davis, and there was like one other starter that didn't play in that game. And so you look at it and say, hey, look, this if the schedule is going to be what we think it is, it's going to be because the quarterback play is strong at a lot of different spots.
Without a doubt, a lot of potential breakouts coming with some opponents on Notre Dame's schedule. I'm with you completely. Brian, like we do with most rankings, we're going to work on this one back to front. We're going to start with 5, work our way to 1. And the first name up on this schedule is one that's very familiar to Notre Dame fans, and that's Steve Angeli at Syracuse.
Yeah, this is one that has a little bit of an asterisk on it for me because we just don't know where Steve is at health-wise. An Achilles injury is a lot different than a knee injury in that athleticism just doesn't always come back full speed right away. The other side of that is he's a quarterback, not a running back. He's a quarterback, not a shooting guard for the Lakers, because people have talked about Kobe just was never the same athlete after the Achilles injury. Like, well, yeah, that's true. Steve doesn't need to be the same athlete. He just needs to be healthy and full go. And if he is, I think Steve is a guy that deserves to be on this list. Now, it's not a given he's going to stay on this list, which we'll talk about at the end. But I'm projecting him to be healthy and be able to start the season this year healthy. That's the rub, though. And I know that there's concerns about they don't have the receiving core they had last year. Okay, so he doesn't lead the nation in passing. He's in the top 10. That still makes him one of the 5 best quarterbacks on the schedule potentially right now. And the reason I put him over a couple other guys we're going to talk about is just he's in a small number proven it. And while I think he struggled a little bit against Tennessee, he also made some big throws in that game. And I thought he was very good against Clemson the last time we saw him. So that's why I'm putting Steve Angel on the list. He's a good talent. He was never in the same league as CJ Carr. He wasn't as talented as Kenny Minchey, but those guys are very, very talented players. Steve does not lack talent. And I think he found a system that fits him very well. A lot of short to intermediate throws with get some ISO deep balls. That's what Steve does well. And so I think those are things that we're going to see him, if healthy, thrive on this year. The key for him is just, can they protect him? Well, they didn't protect him against Tennessee, and he struggled. They protected him against Clemson, and he ripped them up. I mean, it is that simple.
The other piece with Steve, too, and this is more specific to Notre Dame, he's one of the few players on their roster that I'm confident in saying he will not be shaken because he's playing Notre Dame. Now, that's not me predicting that Bear Bachmeier will or Kevin Jennings will or anything like that. But I know Steve won't back down from the fact that they're playing Notre Dame on their home turf. The pageantry of that game will not overwhelm him. I'm very confident in saying that. Very confident.
I mean, this is a kid that walked into the Orange Bowl rusty, hadn't played in a while. Hadn't played in that game. Riley gets knocked out. It wasn't like he had a whole, media timeout and defensive possession because Riley got hurt, and then they punted the next play. And I was like, he had to get in there pretty quickly. It was in the middle of a drive. Now there was a break for Riley to be dealt with, but this wasn't like Riley got hurt. They punted. Penn State went on an 8-play, 5-minute drive. Steve had all this time to game plan and get loose and do it. He came off the bench pretty cold. And, did he make any oh my gosh, what a beautiful throw. Like he threw that backside dig between 3 guys. No, but the point that Trevor's making is he looked like calm. He was like, hey, we're fine. He got the ball where he needed to go. That's all he needed to do. He didn't have to look like John Elway. Get the ball where it needs to go. Who's open? Take it. Hey, the check down's there. I'll take the check down. Hey, I got Jordan Faison in an ISO on a slant route. Let me hit Jordan Faison on this ISO slant route. He didn't complete a single ball 10 yards past the line of scrimmage, but he went got the ball where it needed to go, threw a slot fade to Eli Raritan that got him into a first down off of a penalty. Did what he needed to do to get the momentum back, to get that field goal. Then they come out the second half. They get the first drive. They go right down the field, score. Now all of a sudden we're a tie ball game, started all over. But it was the poise that he showed, and he did that every time he got on the field. That's what we've always said. Look, CJ doesn't have, Steve doesn't have CJ's arm. He's not as accurate. He's got a longer throwing motion. He's not as comfortable in the pocket. He takes too many checkdowns, blah, 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 blah. You can critique his game all you want. But the 2 things we've always said Steve does well, he throws a pretty deep ball, and there's not a moment too big for that kid. His first flipping spring game, he leads the offense down the field for a game-winning touchdown that he runs in and dives and goes in. He will be poised and ready for this moment. It will not be too big for him, and that's another reason, to your point, Trev, that with all due respect to Darian Mensah, who is obviously going to be on this list, and Bear Bachmeier and some of the other guys that are going to be on this list, there's only one other quarterback on the schedule that has been in this moment, and that guy didn't handle that moment very, very well. Steve Angeli's the only guy on this list that had to step into a playoff game and just looked kind of like he belonged there. That's why he's on this list.
Next guy on this list for us is Colton Joseph, the Old Dominion transfer who is now at Wisconsin. You want to know why we've been very, very high on Wisconsin turning around? And when we mean turn around, we don't mean they're going to be a playoff team, just so there's no confusion. But we are confident that they're going to be bowl eligible this year. Their chances of becoming a bowl eligible team are a lot higher because of his presence in Madison. Colton Joseph is a very talented player. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what he can do this year.
Yeah, this is one of those ones, Trev, that it does require some projection because there's not a long list of guys that have gone from G5 to Power 4 just dominated right away. And just because he did it that one game against Indiana doesn't mean he's going to do it all the time. But we've seen enough from him that I'm confident he's going to make that transition pretty well. And he's a very dynamic run throw guy. He's played in some big moments, and he's a guy that's shown he can hurt teams with his arm. Even as a freshman, he had 2 games over 300 yards. One was a win over Georgia Southern. Another was a loss to Appalachian State. You know, the first game of his career, he played a significant number of snaps, was on the road against Coastal Carolina. He threw for 262 yards and 3 touchdown passes. You know, this past season, he has 276 yards and averaged. He went 16 of 22. And this is partly why we have the optimism we do, is because we've seen him against Power 4 teams. He only went 11 of 22 for 96 yards and 3 picks against Indiana. But then he also went out there and rushed for, 179 yards on 10 carries for 2 touchdowns, right? Like, he made some plays. But then he goes up against Virginia Tech 2 weeks later, and he goes 16 of 22 for 276 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, averages 12.5 yards per carry. And, oh, by the way, chips in 63 more rushing yards on 8 carries and another touchdown. At Virginia Tech, you talk about, like, stepping into a pretty big moment. That was a pretty big moment that he stepped into, and he handled it well. He handled the moment well. And when you look at Colton Joseph, that's a big reason why, you know, you and I feel like there's some optimism that he's going to be able to handle this moment well, this transition well. You know, hey, it's different. You look at some of the conference games, you know, they play Liberty at home. There's 18,000 people there. They play at Marshall. There's 23,000 people. They play at JMU. There's 25,000 people. And then the last 6 games of the year that he played last year, either in conference or in a bowl game, had 19,000 or fewer people in it. Well, you're going to Madison, Wisconsin. You're going to be playing Big Ten stadiums. Well, yeah, but I also watched him go on the road against Virginia Tech with 50,000 people, a pretty loud environment, and he was not shook at all by that environment. And that's why you look at him, Trev. But you know, the kid's got an arm. He can throw. He's not a natural, like, drop back. Oh, wow, he looks like C.J. Carr all of a sudden, but he can hurt you with his arm. But he is a dynamic athlete. And he's dynamic in 2 ways, and this is what makes him difficult. He's not like Ian Book, where he's just, man, you thought you had a sack, and he just springs out and runs for 15 yards, and you just can't bring that guy down as a scrambler. He can do that, but you're also going to see him on designed runs, where he's just like, you crash that backside in, you make one mistake as the backside read player, and he's out the gate, which is exactly what Taylon Green did to them last year. Remember that? They made one backside mistake. Jordan Botelho made one backside mistake on Taylon Green. And what did he do? He pulls and goes for 54 yards. Colton Joseph has the same type of dynamic ability. You make one mistake from a discipline standpoint, and he's going to make you pay. And I think the skill set translates real well to the Power 4 level. It would not shock me if he's higher on this list, but I just couldn't put him higher on the list because of the transition he's making. But it would not shock me if at the end of the year, Colton Joseph is higher on this list for us.
I feel now playing styles are different, but I feel very similar about Colton Joseph going into 26 that I felt about CJ Bailey going into 2025. About how we saw the flashes. Now, obviously, they don't transfer. Storylines are a little bit different, but I felt very similar about CJ Bailey as I do about Colton Joseph right now. CJ Bailey had a much better season in 25 than he did in 24. So very interested to see what he could do. But he's also not the only dual threat quarterback that's on the list, because up next for us is BYU's quarterback, Bear Bachmeier, who a lot of people have tabbed as a Heisman candidate dark horse. Now, I don't know if I'm there yet. FanDuel isn't either. He's at plus 6,500 odds to win the Heisman Trophy this year, but he is a talented player.
Whereabouts does that place him, Trev? Like, as far as like number of people, like is it top 10, top 15, top 20? Like, about
it's
where
more
is that?
so, yeah, it's more so top 20. He's near the Sagapolatele kid from California. Okay. So,
yeah. So when I look at Bear Bachmeier, I'm fine with him saying he's a dark horse. You want to say he is a top 10 Heisman Trophy candidate? I'm not there with you. You want to talk to me about how he's a candidate? He's a guy that I got my eye on as a bit of a dark horse, especially, with some of the turmoil going on in the Big 12, and he's got a chance to lead them to a Big 12 title. We were talking about a kid that what he did last year, Trev, he did as a true freshman, thrust into a very tough situation. Their expected starting quarterback gets kicked out of school, actually gets suspended and then decides to leave school. And Bear steps in, had originally signed with Stanford. And then when their coach got fired, he leaves for BYU. So, I mean, this kid went through a rocky start. None of it of his own doing, but he responded to the moment and stepped up and played good football last year, Trev. In 14 games last year, passed for 3,033 yards, had 527 rushing yards. So he's at what would that be, 3,560 yards last year, 26 touchdowns last season as a true freshman, and had some moments in some kind of key situations where he played really well and was able to lead them to victory. Obviously making some big plays in the Utah game with his arm and legs. The numbers weren't going to knock your socks off, but he was clutch. Goes on the road against Iowa State and just throws for 307 yards, 2 touchdowns, plays very well in that game. Had a great game against TCU, just in a game where TCU was ranked in that game. And he passes for 296 yards and a touchdown, no picks in that game. He also carries the ball 10 times for 59 yards and a touchdown in that game. Goes on the road and outduels Brennan Sorsby, passes for 127 yards, also rushes in that game for 46 yards and a touchdown and leads him to a 26-14 victory. So, and then he finishes the year off in a matchup against Haynes King. Actually, Haynes played that game, correct? Didn't Haynes play that game, the bowl game?
Yes.
I thought he did. And he passes for 325 yards and a touchdown, 8.6 yards per carry, and went over Georgia Tech. So, this is a kid that's had games of over 300 yards. He also, had rushing performances of 98, 89, 59, 49, 46, had 11 rushing touchdowns. This kid's a good football player. Is he a star? That I don't know. Like, is he closer to what his ultimate ceiling is going to be? That I don't know. But there's no doubt he has a chance to get better this year. And it's that dual threat ability, but it's a different type of dual threat ability than what Colton Joseph brings to the table. Where Colton's just elusive and athletic and explosive. Kevin Jennings is like a shifty, guy that can. This is a big 225, 235 pound kid that they can just run power O with. Like, he's more Riley Leonard than he is, a Colton Joseph type of player. Or I'm trying to think of some other guys that like, he's not Pat White. He's not, he's Riley Leonard. If you're going to think of two styles of play, he's more for BYU what Riley Leonard did for Notre Dame, and I really think he can have that kind of impact for BYU. I'm saying national title, but like just that he does it. Sometimes you watch him and it's like it's not sexy, and you're not like, boy, this is a great quarterback. But then you just look down at the game and you're like, threw for 215 yards, and then he ran for 55, and then you break down the tape and you're like, boy, he was clutch on this play. And what a great decision there to tuck the ball and move the chains on 3rd and 4. And then the next play, they hand it off to LJ Martin, who runs for 37-yard touchdown. And you're like, yeah, LJ on the stat sheet, LJ made the big play, but it was that clutch scramble, that check down as he's getting drilled that converts the chain, moves the chains, converts the 3rd down, that sets them up for the play where LJ maybe goes off and rips off the big run. And it's that kind of stuff that Bear brings to the table, where he does a lot of that dirty work. And he can have a game where if you only look at the stat sheet, and this is how Riley was, you could look at the stat sheet and be like, okay, you paid how much money for that kid? And if you didn't watch the game, you're like, why are Notre Dame fans so in love with Riley Leonard? Like, I just looked at it because you got to watch the game to appreciate what Riley brought to the table. And that's what I think Bear does for BYU. He's never going to be sexy. He's never going to be on that same level as the CJ Carrs and the Arch Mannings and the Dante Moores, in my opinion. He's always going to be that. He's a good player, but the guy just wins, and he just makes plays, and he's got sort of that leadership capability that you watch and where guys just kind of naturally gravitate to him. And that's why I think he's a little bit of an underappreciated quarterback because I think people pick this game apart. I'm like, you guys remember he was a true freshman, right? We're just going to ignore that and pretend like this is the best we're ever going to see at Bear Bachmeier? No, he's a good quarterback.
Agree with everything that you just said about Bear Bachmeier. Sidebar, and I was thinking about this when you were talking about what he did at BYU. Do you know how much more of an exciting opponent preview it would be when we break down Stanford if Bear Bachmeier was their quarterback this year.
Yeah. We'd be having a much different conversation about the Stanford run game this year. You are spot on.
Yeah, man. I was thinking about that. I mean, it's behind guys like, Nicky Prongos and what Khalil House comes back for them. Micah Ford comes back for them. The outlook with that might be a little different. But I agree with everything that you said about Bear Bachmeier, man. He's a gamer and he's a baller. And those are some of my favorite players to watch at the college level. Honestly, I'm
agree.
Next on our list, Brian, is SMU's quarterback, Kevin Jennings, one of the most career-wise productive quarterback on Notre Dame's schedule. We're talking about a guy who over the last 2 seasons has thrown for over 6,800 yards. He's passed for 49 touchdowns. But then the caveat is he's also thrown for 24 interceptions the last 2 years as well. But, he's a quarterback that has playoff experience, something that I don't think nobody else on Notre Dame's schedule can say. Now, it was 2 years ago, but Kevin Jennings played against Penn State on the road. So he has experience in a big, raucous environment. We talked about the levels of success that SMU has had over the last 2 seasons. You can't talk about that unless you start talking about the performance and the role that Kevin Jennings played in it.
There's no question. And it's disappointing the way he played in the playoff game because he was so much fun to watch during the season. And I think we've talked about this. That game, I think, affected him. He just was not the same player for maybe the first third of maybe a little bit more of last season. Then eventually started looking more and more like the Kevin Jennings of old. And now he's going to have to make sure that he shakes off the performance in the bowl game. Again, he had a rough performance against Arizona last year in the bowl game. Threw for a lot of yards, 21 of 32, 278 yards. But then he threw no touchdowns and 3 picks. Like, he's got to shake that off. And when you look at the interception issues, Trev, threw 13 this past season, threw 11 the year before. He said, so that's 24 interceptions. Over a third of them have come in 3 games. He tends to be one of those bunches guys when it comes to interceptions. He tends to throw, if he's going to be off in a game, it's just going to kind of snowball a little bit. He's got to avoid that. Look, I know that we're in this era where like everybody obsesses over you can't ever turn the ball over. That's fine. I don't want dumb turnovers. I don't want bad timing, but there's going to be times when certain quarterbacks are just going to turn the ball over. And that's okay. I've talked about this. The year that Ian Book threw more picks than he ever threw in his career was the best year he ever had in Notre Dame. He was dynamic because he was willing to take some chances early on. And then sometimes it'd result in an interception. I can live with that. What Kevin has to avoid are the bad interceptions. And that's what killed him against Penn State. They moved the ball relatively well early in that game. And he would just throw picks like, did you not see that linebacker standing right there? Like, it's those kind of plays that he's going to have to avoid. And they tend to come in bunches for him. But when he's playing smart, but also aggressive, he is a very difficult quarterback to defend. And you talked about the production, Trev. I mean, you mentioned it. Last year, in a year where not a lot of people talk about his performance, he was a 66% completion guy that threw for 3,641 yards and 26 touchdowns. Also rushed for more touchdowns. So he's a 30-touchdown guy. In 2024, he threw for 3,245 touchdown yards, 23 touchdowns, and added 5 more touchdowns on the ground. And then, of course, the year before, 618 yards. The year before that, 5 touchdowns. So he's played a lot of football in his career at SMU. Here's the thing that's going to be key for Kevin Jennings as far as whether he's number 2 on our list or he falls down to 4 or 5 or out of our list, because he has the widest range. There's not a kid on this list, including our number 1 guy, that's locked into that position. There's no world in which he's not going to be anything but that ranking. There's all some variation. But our number 1 guy isn't going to be 6. He's not going to be 5, in my opinion. It's like, is he going to be 1, 2, or 3? That's debatable. It depends on how he plays and some other guys, and there's some talk. Kevin Jennings could be number 1 on this list. He could be off the list. It just depends on how he plays. 2 things he's got to do. Number 1, he's just got to be willing to overcome early mistakes. He's a guy that when he makes an early mistake or he gets out of rhythm, sometimes it can be hard for him to get himself out of that funk. Number 2, he's got to stop convincing himself he's 6'4", 235-pound drop-back quarterback. Brother, use your legs. When you use your legs, you're very difficult to defend. last year, that was the thing that kind of bothered me a little bit about his game last year, Trev. He went from, in 2024, running for over 354 yards. He even ran for 142 yards in 2023 and only played like 5 games.
Jeez.
Last year, he rushed for 54 yards on 70 carries and 4 touchdowns because he refused to run. Part of it was, I don't know, was he banged up? Was he injured? I don't know the answer to that. But we've seen this mistake before where kids who are athletic quarterbacks, like some of them like, hey, man, I'm an athletic quarterback. I'm going to use that to my advantage. But then there's others that like, I'm afraid that people are going to pigeonhole me into this, so I'm going to not play my game. Dude, you're hurting yourself and your team when you do that. Who cares what scouts or NFL draft analysts are going to want to say or do about you? Play your game. And you're an athlete. You're a 6 foot, 190-pound quarterback who's athletic. Use it. Use it to your advantage because you are a much harder player to defend when you're willing to climb the pocket and go, or roll out and instead of trying to dump it off, run. Like there was the play he threw that what's killed him in the Penn State game. He's rolling out. If he just, I think it was a 4th down or 3rd down. If he just runs, he might score, but he throws a ball and he misses. And it's just like, dude, why did you not run? There's way too many plays like that where he's trying to prove something. Like, no, I can drop back and throw the football. Dude, I don't care. Yeah, we know you can do that. But you're better there when you use that part of your game. And that to me is going to be the thing that determines whether or not Kevin Jennings is just a productive quarterback or a really good quarterback. He was a productive quarterback last year. Wasn't a great quarterback. He can be a great quarterback in the college level. Like I should say great, really good quarterback at the collegiate level. If he'll just be willing to use all of his tools better. He's not like a designed runner. He's not Lamar Jackson. He's not that, but he is a shifty, athletic guy. He's not as explosive as Colton Joseph athletically. Like Colton Joseph is a true dual threat quarterback. I think that Kevin is more of a athletic quarterback. So I don't know that you're going to like design your run game around him the way you will with Bear Bachmeier and Colton Joseph, but you can do things with him as a runner. He just needs to be willing to use his athleticism, even in the throwing game. Use your athleticism, and if he can do that, Trev, he'll lock in at this number 2 spot, or maybe even go up one, or maybe go down one just because somebody else has a monster season. But he'll be one of the best quarterbacks on the schedule. If he's unwilling to do that, I think he falls off the schedule. If he plays like he did last year, he may not be in the top 5. There's a little bit of projection here that he bounces back and gets back to being more of that guy that he was 2 years ago. And they're definitely going to need that. They're going to need that a lot more.
Agreed completely. There are some similarities with his game to Everett Golson, in my opinion. Like they're very similar size. They're more athletic quarterbacks, not necessarily the Riley Leonard, Colton Joseph, where you're going to design a run game plan around him. But they're also similar in that we saw it with Everett, especially in 2014. Mistakes would start to snowball, and how you respond to adversity is going to be huge for Kevin Jennings because they're a team that has the potential, Brian, to be undefeated when they roll into South Bend on November 21st. They have that potential. They're going to need Kevin Jennings to avoid some of those mistakes, though, along the way.
I love that. I love that comparison to Everett Golson because that's what Everett did in 2014 as well. He kept trying to prove to everyone that he was a 6 foot, 190-pound drop back quarterback. And he stopped using his legs the way he did in 2012. And it hurt him. Yeah, he put up numbers, but he wasn't able to impact the game the same way. And he would then what? He'd force throws, and because where in the past he would have just tucked it and ran in that situation. Now he's trying to, I got to stay in the pocket. And that's when you force a throw. That's when you turn the ball over. That is a great, I never thought about that analogy, Trev, of the Everett Golson versus Kevin Jennings comparison. That is a great comparison. He doesn't have quite have Everett's arm, but the overall way to impact the game. Everett was a passing quarterback who was really athletic. You weren't going to design your whole run game around him, but when he would run and scramble and pull the occasional backside read zone, he was so hard to defend when he used his legs like he was in 2014. Everett became much easier to defend in 2014 because you say just let him sit in the pocket and he's going to make a mistake. He's eventually going to make a mistake because he won't get back to being what he was. That's a great comparison. I'm digging that. I wish I would have thought of that myself. Be like, hey, I told Trevor to say that before the show. That great comparison. That was actually me. I wanted to give him some props, and let him show us more. No, that's a great comparison. Let's get to the number one guy on our list, Trev.
Yeah, it's consistent with a lot of the other rankings that we've done. The Miami starting quarterback is at the top of this list. They had the number one offense that they're going to face, and we also talked about them having the best defense. But it's not just because it's Miami. It's also because Darian Mensah was a very productive, very good quarterback last year for Duke. There's a reason why they went out and won the ACC last year as a 5-loss team, and it was because of the performance of Darian Mensah last year. It's been talked about as one of the best portal pickups this cycle, and I'm interested to see what he does this year for Miami.
Yeah, I am as well, Trev. I'm comfortable, quite comfortable having Darian Mensah on this list as the number one quarterback. There's no doubt about it. And I think we saw him make the Power 4 adjustment last year, playing in a system that was obviously, very passer friendly, put up a lot of big numbers, 334 yards against Illinois, 313 against Tulane. Went for 269 while out dueling CJ Bailey, 9.6 yards a carry while out dueling a Steve Angeli-less Syracuse offense. Was very good on the road against Cal, was very, productive against Georgia Tech, ripped up Clemson. I mean, just destroyed Clemson, ripped up Wake Forest pretty good, outdueled Arizona State in a bowl game, 42-39 win, put up a lot of numbers there, 51 touchdowns. So a lot of yards, a lot of great yards, 3,973 yards, 34 touchdowns, 6 picks last season. Here's my issue with Darian Mensah is the turnover numbers are a little bit misleading because he had 6 picks, but I think he had something like 8 lost fumbles last season. Like turnovers are turnovers. And if anything, a fumble is worse than especially because not all of them, but I think 6 or 7 of them, I believe were in the pocket. Those are worse because if I throw a pick, it's 15 yards further down away from the end zone, where if I fumble, it's behind the line and they're as close, they're going to be closer to the end zone. He's got to do a better job of protecting the football. Has to do a better job of protecting the football. The good news for him is he doesn't have to play hero ball. Part of the reason he had the fumbles last year at Duke is because he had to play hero ball a lot. So he's running around and looking for somebody to go for. I think the other thing that will hurt him too is it's exactly what we just said about Kevin Jennings. Dude, you're not a dual threat quarterback. You're not. We're not trying to pretend that you are. We're not going to sit there and tell everybody that you're a dual threat quarterback, but you're a pretty athletic kid. Be willing to tuck it and run. Just pick up the first down and slide. And he did that at Tulane. Last year, he was minus. It is inexcusable for a kid with his athleticism to have been in the negatives in rushing yards and had 1 rushing touchdown. Because, again, part of the problem he had is he would run around. He's going to wait as long as he can to make a throw instead of, dude, just tuck it and run for 8 yards. Sometimes he'd make big plays, but then other times he's fumbling the football. And those are things that Darian Mensah is going to have to say, hey, man, it's okay to be an athletic kid. He's not a great athlete, but he's a good athlete. He can scramble. He can move the chains with his legs. I want to see him utilize that more a little bit this year, which I think then makes him even harder to defend because now when he starts scrambling, you can watch it when teams defend him. They chase up front and then they stay in coverage in the back end because they know he does not want to run the football. And so it makes him a little bit easier to defend, which is why you can create some games where he was not overly efficient. Put up big numbers. I mean, great. I mean, I'm really happy that you threw for a bunch of yards against, Arizona State in the bowl game, 327 yards. That's great. But, dude, you needed 51 passes to do it. That's 6.4 yards per attempt. So on November 1st, he was at 8.8 yards per attempt. And up to that point in time in the season, he was at 11.4, 9.8, 9.6, 9.6, 8.8, 8.5, 8.8. And there was one game he wasn't good. That was against his old school Tulane at 6.1. The last 6 games of the year, Trev, he was 7.2, 6.1, 5.3, 7.7, 7.8, and 6.4. And I think what some teams started to realize is this kid doesn't want to run the ball. So stay back and keep him in the pocket because he'll force some mistakes. He'll run around and instead of just tucking into running, he'll hold on the ball and either throw a pick or a fumble. And then you need the volume for him to be effective. I think he's capable of being a lot more efficient quarterback. I do. He'll have a much better supporting cast around him. Much better. He doesn't have to, hey, I got to, if I don't play great, we have no chance of winning. That's pretty much what he's been what he was last year. Doesn't have to be that. Hey, buddy, it's okay to just tuck it and run and get 6 yards. It's okay to just take the check down. You don't have to play hero ball all the time. And if he can adapt into that, but then be more willing to use your legs to where teams have to then start coming up when you're moving around, that's when you can hit some of those big throws down the field. So if Darian Mensah can do that, I think he's got a chance to be one of the 5 or 6 best quarterbacks in college football. If he just repeats his performance at Duke, he'll be productive, but he won't be quite as impactful. Because for all the impact he had last year, they went 8-5. I mean, you can't ignore that. They went 8-5. And Duke's not. Hey, I saw Riley Leonard lead them to 9 wins with a team that wasn't that, less productive. Losing at home to Virginia by 17. You lost to UConn. You lost at home to Georgia Tech by 9. You lost to Tulane by a touchdown. You got blown up by Illinois. It's not like you were out there getting beat by great teams. You take away the Clemson game, and we have a very different view of this season, in my opinion. But and that was what, a 7-6 team. If you want to lead this team to a championship and not just put up big numbers, you've got to me, embrace who you are, but also accept the fact that you don't have to repeat your production from last year because you got some dudes around you. So I'm curious to see what he's going to do this season, Trev, and how he alters his game, if at all, now that he's in the offense he's in with the talent around him that he's going to have.
The biggest thing that I want to see from Darian Mensah this year is a little bit more consistency in the bigger moments. I have no doubt that, when Miami plays, whoever they start the season against, I'm sure it's not great. I have no doubt about it that Darian Mensah is going to rip them up.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't buy into, I've seen it sometimes in the chat, I've seen it on Twitter, the message boards, things like that Darian Mensah is terrible in big games. It's like, well, okay, we can't also forget about, what he did against Georgia Tech at home, Clemson on the road. I'm sympathetic to that.
It is wild how some of those narratives get created. It really is. Like, we're just going to pretend like playing at Clemson wasn't a big moment. It's the biggest crowd he's ever played in front of. Right. You're going to act like the ACC championship game doesn't mean anything. A bowl game against Arizona State doesn't mean anything. He was bad, at Oklahoma 2 years ago when he was on the Tulane team?
Right. For Mensah, one of the things, though, is he can run a little hot and cold in some of those games, though. Yep. For as great of a performance as he had against Clemson on the road, 2 weeks later, he completes 51% of his passes in a 17-point loss against Virginia at home. So it's finding the in-between those. And now I'm with you. I think organically, some of that is going to get taken care of when you have Mark Fletcher and Malachi Toney and Cooper Barkati and Shamar Brown and Jackson Cantwell and Samson Okunlola and guys like that. I think some of that organically will get taken care of. But
Cam Vaughn, Travis Jacobs.
Right, exactly. And that defense to where he doesn't have to.
Right.
But if they want to play for a championship and make a run in the playoffs, he will have to stop running as hot and cold and kind of find that good middle ground. I'm with you completely.
Yep. Agree. Trev, so those are the guys that we looked at and said, hey, these are the 5 on the list, but it wasn't cut and dry in our opinion. There are some other quarterbacks that we have on the list that I think deserve to be in the conversation, or are guys that, hey, if this guy could kind of do this or this, I think he's got a chance to be there. Some of it's being new starters. Some of it's, hey, you had a bad year as a starter, but you've got the talent. So let's talk about 3, kind of wild card guys, not necessarily like honorable mention, but like wild cards of guys who we don't yet know what they're going to do this year. But if they do what you and I think they're capable of, they could force their way into this list. And it starts with a guy that we actually saw do damage to Notre Dame last year, and that's Braxton Woodson. He didn't play a whole lot last year. There were 2 games he was asked to step up and play a lot, and he did Notre Dame, and he rushed for 100 yards, and then he had to come off the bench again a week later against South Florida, and he ripped South Florida up off the bench. Ran for over 100 yards in that game as well, and a big upset that game where they tried to get Blake Horvath going again, but he got banged up again. Andre comes off the bench. I'm thinking of Andre Woodson from Kentucky. Braxton Woodson comes off the bench once again and rips off big plays. And just the thing I learned about him in those 2 games is it's a lot of like what we said about Steve Angeli. The moment's just not going to be too big for him. And, he's a different type of quarterback than Blake Horvath. But if he can if he can be as a starter, and this is always the rub when a guy's coming off the bench compared to when now you're the guy. Can you be the guy you were in moments all the time or not? That's what makes Braxton Woodson a bit of a wild card. But if he can be that all the time, he's going to be the next great Navy option quarterback. But it's still a question mark for me.
I'm very interested to see what Braxton Woodson can do this year. Some of his success, in my opinion, is going to be up to Drew Cronick, their offensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Navy is going to look more like a traditional triple option offense this year than what they were under Blake Horvath. If Drew Cronick can accept that and mold the offense to what best fits Braxton Woodson, I'm with you. I think we could talk about him in the same lights that we talk about Ricky Dobbs and Keenan Reynolds and Blake Horvath. It'll look a little different. But I'm with you. He's a talented player, man. Big-bodied kid, very, very mobile. Obviously, if you're the starting quarterback at Navy. So I'm very interested to see what he can do. Very interested.
Yeah, me too, Trev. It's going to be a very interesting year for him. And they're going to need it because if they're going to keep rolling the way they've been rolling in recent years, Trev, they're going to need him to kind of pick up because as we've said a million times on this show, the offense goes as far as the quarterback and fullback will take them. And that was still true even the last 2 years as they kind of became a more balanced, I use that, air quotes for those listening to the podcast.
Navy balance.
Navy balance, right? Exactly. Where they can drop back and throw the ball a little bit, but they're still an option team. Yeah, you're still going to go only as far as your fullback and tailback can get you. Loose Emoji used to talk about this. He's like, look, the only thing that Navy needs up front is just veterans. Like, it's not like you need elite offensive linemen. You just well-coached, tough kids who know what they're doing. That's the system takes care of itself in that regard. They're not like Notre Dame where they're trying to run mid-zone and inside zone and duo where you really need to be good. The system takes care of itself a lot. They get their linebacker, they get their O-lineman up on the line. Why, you say their offensive linemen are undersized. Like, well, because they're down blocking, they're trap blocking, they're getting to the second level a lot. They're not just base blocking on duo all game. You know what I mean? And so you don't need to be that big. You just got to be smart and have some experience. It really comes down to, can your quarterback and your fullback be playmakers? That's really what this offense comes down to. And so they're going to need Braxton Woodson. Here's another team, Trev, that we've got our eye on. And I did a little homework last night because our show is notorious, in my opinion, for butchering difficult last names of young men who have, not your traditional would be like Western European, type of heritage where it's it's Smith, Driscoll, Jones, Trowbridge, things like that. But it's Milivojevic. So it's Alessio Milivojevic is how you say that. He's another wild card that I'm very curious to see because I actually have been able to dive a little bit more into his tape lately, and there's some things to like there, Trev. He's got a little bit of that Steve Angeli to where he just kind of comes off the bench and looks like it's like no big deal. I'm kind of calm. I'm going to go out there and make plays. He is the anti-Aiden Childs, where Aiden Childs is like this big, strapping, athletic, big-armed quarterback, and when he is on, he is a dude. But when he is off, he doesn't even need to be on scholarship. I mean, it is so maddening watching Aiden Childs be so schizophrenic. Alessio just kind of steps on the field, and he's just like, hey, man, I got this. It's all good. He doesn't have the size that Aiden has. He doesn't have the huge arm. He's not as dynamic as an athlete. But, dude, he just goes out there and runs the offense. He's another one that if he can kind of carry over what he did off the bench or in the spot starts and carry that into full-time play, he's a kid that's going to do some damage this year for Michigan State. You look at the numbers last year, Trev. He threw for 1,267 yards, 10 touchdowns, 3 picks. Really only played the last 4 games of the year. Threw for 311 yards against Minnesota, 128 against Penn State, 255 at Iowa, and 292 at Maryland. In the last 2 games, he threw for 255 and 292 yards on a lot of attempts. So the yards per attempt was low. 6 touchdowns and 2 picks for them last season. And he's a kid that he's a pocket passer, and he's nothing more than really a chain mover. But this was the first time we'd really seen him play, and he showed us some stuff. Now, it's a very small sample size, late in the year, season's kind of over. You don't really know what he's bringing to the table. Can he carry that over into the season? That's a very legitimate question. But he showed enough from me in especially the last 2 games of the year. I'm like, I got my eye on this kid. I'm curious to see what he can do now that he's the guy. Is he going to kind of, okay, now the pressure's on me, I'm going to fold a little bit? Or is it like, okay, it's about time y'all did what you needed to do. Now let me go do this thing. Because he's got a quick release. He's not like a runner, but there's multiple clips where he's climbing the pocket and, throwing the ball, and you're getting on the run and throwing the ball on the run and making quick decisions and getting the ball out, seeing pressure, throwing a little stick route behind it to get the ball out behind the linebacker. Like, you see something like, hey, this guy could be a pretty darn good chain mover as both as a thrower, and then can make the occasional downfield throw through a beautiful cover 2 wheel route. So like they ran cover 2, but they ran like a back out of the backfield, like kind of a wheel route. And the safety kind of didn't see it because they kind of went receivers over, and safety comes off late. And he just throws this beautiful ball, linebackers trail, and the running back just drops it right over top down to get them into the red zone against Iowa. Like, you're like, dude, this guy's got some guts. Like, I like this kid. And now I'm curious if he can kind of carry it into the season and do that on a full-time basis, especially in a new system.
Yeah, without a doubt. And Michigan State has had a lot of success with those types of quarterbacks over the years. I think of, what is his name? Caleb Lewerke, Brian Lewerke. You think of Connor Cook,
Brian.
You think of Kirk Cousins. Like
Brian, come on, dude.
Yes, my bad.
No, I'm just kidding. But no, you're correct. And none of them have been like, you go Jeff Smoker, Connor Cook, like none of them been like, oh my gosh, elite first round NFL quarterback. You're like, dude, that's just a gritty gamer, good college quarterback. Like that guy can make some plays. He's gritty. He's tough. It's exactly what Michigan State needs.
Yeah.
That personality. And he fits that blue collar, we're little brother, and we are feeling insulted by that. We've got some of that chip on our shoulder because everybody's, Michigan's the in-state school and nobody respects us. And we were all 3-star and 2-star recruits. And that's exactly who he is. And he carries himself that way. And if he can now, turn that into making plays with his arm and stuff, he's got a chance to be a good quarterback for Michigan. He's also one of the reasons why we are a little higher on Michigan State this year is
Yep.
We're projecting that he's going to be able to do what he did in those last 4 games into a more permanent basis in a less chaotic environment at Michigan State behind what I think is going to be an improved offensive line as well. So I'm very curious to see what he's going to do in that system.
Same.
Very.
Well, I am too. But he's not the only Big Ten quarterback on this list for us. The last guy that we're going to talk about today is Ryan Brown, the quarterback at Purdue. He was a frustrating player last year to watch because he was somebody that I had my eye on going into the season of like, hey, if he can channel who he was to varying degrees, like he was against Illinois in 2024, Purdue might have found themselves a pretty darn good quarterback. We saw flashes. He was pretty decent in the first half against Notre Dame. But the week before he wasn't great against USC. And then really the rest of the season, he was just kind of But he's a player that if it could start to click for him, year 2 in the Barry Odom era in Purdue, maybe he turns some things around.
Like even the USC game, Trev, he had some really good moments in that game, but then he would just make some terrible throws and throw an interception. So like if you look at, I'm looking at CFBstats.com and it goes left to right. It shows you playing surface, score of the game, attempts, completions, percentage yards per attempt, touchdowns, interceptions, and ratios. If you like put your hand over your right eye and you stop at touchdown, so you can't see interception or rating, you're like, dude, he had a pretty good game against USC.
Yeah.
Like 61% completions and 305 yards, 7.8 per attempt isn't bad. A touchdown, like, all right, okay, cool. Oh, 3 picks, 120 rating. All right, he didn't have a very good game. Those are things that you look at him, and to your point, it's frustrating because he ended up having 2 touchdowns that game because he also ran for a touchdown. And in the first half against Notre Dame, he looked really good. And then once the heat pressure got, once Notre Dame started to heat him up a little bit in the second half, he folded. And then the next game against Illinois, again, you look at the first part, 60% completion, 302 yards, but then I'm going to ignore the fact he was only 6 yards in attempt and 1 touchdown and no picks. And you're like, yeah, okay. And he just wasn't the guy we thought he could have been. And it was very frustrating watching it. So he gets one more crack at it. And athletic kid, pretty decent arm. He's just got to be able to put it all together. And can he handle the pressure? Can he run a system beyond 1-2 throw? And that's what I always say is you got to be careful looking at a guy that came off the bench, because what was a lot of our, hey, I'm excited to see what this guy can do. What was it based on, Trev? It was the one start he made last year against Illinois, where he completes 69% of his passes in the 24 game against Illinois, throws for 297 yards, 11.4 per attempt, 3 touchdowns, no picks, in a 50-49 loss, rushes for 118 yards, and you're like, dude, he was a guy. But as soon as people started getting some film on him, they started finding the issues, which is, again, you got to pay attention to this when you're evaluating a quarterback. So first career start, 297 yards, 3 touchdowns, runs for 100 yards, comes out the next season, has 311 yards in his first game, 305 in his third game, 250 against Notre Dame, 302, and then the bottom falls out. Why? Because now we got some film on you. Now we know where you struggle. Now we know where to bring pressure from. Now we know to do certain things up the middle because you don't know how to handle up the middle pressure. You don't know how to handle, these kind of post-snap rolls. If we take your 1-2 away, you're going to panic. And so now there's some film on him. There's a book on Ryan Brown. And when that started to get implemented, and here's why that matters, because now once one team shows it, everybody else starts to follow suit until he can overcome it. Now there's a book on him. And he's going to have to show that, hey, I can process reads longer, further. I can better handle the pocket. Like you look at the Alicio kid from Michigan State, he handles pressure way better. Like, and when I mean pressure, I don't mean like big moment. I mean literal defensive pressure way better than Ryan Brown does in very limited snaps. And if he can handle that and improve there and just become a better decision maker, he's got a chance to be a pretty good quarterback. But he's got the most approved, but that's also partly because he's played the most. Alicio is Ryan Brown from 24. Like, dude, small sample size, but he looked pretty good in that small sample size. Well, now we got the full sample size. So are in that, and I guess that's kind of the cautionary tale for Braxton Woodston and let me say it again. I want to get it right. Alicio Milivojevic. Can you guys avoid? Are you Ryan Brown or are you somebody else? Or are you Steve Angeli, who looks poised in limited snaps? Then when it's your turn to become the guy, hey, you're just always kind of that guy. That's what we're going to find out.
Brian, let's preview Notre Dame's 5th opponent of the regular season up next during the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And we're talking about the North Carolina Tar Heels, which is one of the more intriguing teams of Notre Dame's 2026 schedule because, people look at what they did last year, the weird off the field stuff with like Bill Belichick that people like to poke fun at. But when you really start to look at this as a football team, there's some stuff to like about North Carolina, and they could be one of those sneaky programs that has a better season than what some are projecting them to have.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, Trev, because when I look at North Carolina last year, and we'll kind of do a 2025 recap, you're like, I don't know if this is going to work. And it was just like a soap opera. It's just all the nonsense with Bill Belichick and his girlfriend and whether she's allowed on the field or not allowed on the field. It's just like, dude, this is ridiculous. This is just dumb. And if you're not going to take this serious, go find something else to do with your time, But what you kind of miss is like, hey, this is still Bill Belichick, right? I mean, this is still a guy that is a football genius. Now, is he a great head coach? I mean, look, you can say all you want that, he only won Super Bowls because of Tom Brady. I mean, they won Super Bowls together, but it's not like they were winning Super Bowls in spite of Bill Belichick, especially since the first couple of Super Bowls were more about his defenses and what they were doing on that side of the ball than they were, Tom Brady doing his thing. But this is still a great coach. It's one of those things where when I look at Bill Belichick, it's like, dude, you gotta kind of swallow the pride a little bit. Like, listen to what's his GM's name? Like Michael Lombardi. And they're just talking like, we've got the secret sauce. All you college programs are dumb. You don't know how to evaluate. You know how to scout. And he would make not the GM or not the head coach, but the GM like, hey, we really know how to evaluate. We really know how to scout. Like, dude, who do you think you are? Scott Pioli or something like that? Like, how about you shut your pie hole and like win a game or two before you start talking about how smart you are at evaluating players? It just kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. It was a very frustrating first year under Bill Belichick. And then obviously the results were what they were. So then the question now is, will he just keep doing what he's doing and saying, hey, it's not me, it's the players. We went out and got better players. So I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And now we're doing it with better players. Or is he going to be like, hey, I got to get better players, and I got to coach better. I got to lead better. I got to set a better example. I can't be having all this nonsense drama all the time around the program. So that's kind of the question when you look at year 2 of Bill Belichick. Does he really want to go out the way he went out last year, where it's like there's more stories written about your girlfriend than there is about the job you're doing as a football coach? Is that really how you want to go out? And that's what makes this season incredibly intriguing. Is he going to, hey, man, it's time to get back to doing what I do? Or is it just going to be another year of a soap opera? I don't know the answer to that, Trev, and I think that's the question. But if he gets back to being Bill Belichick, the coach, and not Bill Belichick, the ego, I think this North Carolina team could surprise some people this year. There's quality talent on this football team, but when you watch the team last year, Trev, they got a long way to go. I mean, long way to go, offensively especially. But even late in the year, their defense faltered down the stretch. But for most of the year, they were pretty decent on defense. For most of the year, there's a couple games here and there, but they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games they held opponents to 21 or fewer points. So that they have some potential there. They got to figure stuff out on offense. But at the end of the day, it starts at the top. They watch them on film. They were a dysfunctional team. They were inconsistent. They were erratic. They were a very undisciplined football team. And you're just like, this is not what you expect from a Bill Belichick football team. This is just not what you expect. 87th in the country in penalties, per game. 111th in the country in penalty yards per game. Like that's the stuff I'm talking about. Like you could watch them play and be like, dude, this is an incredibly undisciplined football team. And then, you watch them play and you're like, oh yeah, maybe because they're playing like their coach is living with this just drama, no discipline, no focus. It's all this other nonsense. And it was a distraction. Can they fix that this year? That really, to me, is the key to year 2, because they actually did a decent job of evaluating players. We're going to talk about that as we preview them. That some of the guys they brought in and some of the guys they're bringing back. This is not a bottom third of the schedule roster that Notre Dame is facing, even though it's a bottom third of the schedule team right now.
Yeah, the biggest thing, programs emulate, teams emulate that of their head coach. We've talked about that with South Carolina and how volatile they are to just blowing a gasket and being undisciplined. And I think the biggest thing that Bill Belichick had to get accustomed to is, hey, dude, you're not coaching 28, 29, 30-year-olds anymore. You're coaching 18, 19, and 20-year-olds now. And I think that led to a lot of the undiscipline. And I think that started to show. And, when you start talking about FanDuel odds and where they believe that they're going to be this year, they think it's going to be a little bit more of the same. They think that North Carolina is going to be a 4.5, 5.5 win football team this year. But if he can get adjusted to the college game, which is where I have a love-hate relationship with bringing in Bobby Petrino to the staff, because I like him as an offensive mind. I don't think he's as great as what some people make him out to be. I also don't think he's as bad from an X's and O's standpoint of what other people make him out to be. But you're bringing in a coach to your staff that's a veteran in the college game, and we'll see how much that helps him. But how much Bill Belichick is willing to adjust this season will dictate a lot of their success.
I do think that in some ways, bringing in Bobby Petrino was a potentially smart move. And here's the thing about Bobby Petrino. He is either going to be a great hire or he's going to be Judas. I mean, there's no in between, because either he's going to be bought in, hey, I'm not going to stay at North Carolina. I'm just here to help Bill win and then get myself back somewhere else. Because what I think Bobby Petrino does is this is someone who has coached in the National Football League and in college football. And I think can help with that transition of like, hey, it's okay to run this like a pro organization with the way that the game is now. But this is still, like you said, Trev, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. This isn't a bunch of NFL vets where you didn't have to worry about coaching technique and coaching this and bringing kids along. You've got to develop them. You've got to be the person that gets them ready to go then to the Patriots and be ready as young men and football players to survive. That's part of your job now. And you can still do that in a, hey, it's still a bit of a business, that kind of thing. And so, but then if Bobby Petrino's got his eyes on, your job or your motorcycle or your girlfriend, then all of a sudden he can be kind of a bit of a problem. And that's the concern of hiring a guy like Bobby Petrino is if you're just getting the football coach, you're getting a good football coach. I mean, Arkansas didn't lose games last year because of their offense. You know what I mean, Trev? Like So those things you point to, and I think this team has potential, but they're going to have to look like a completely different team from last year when, 19 points a game, 24 scored, 24 and a half allowed, lost games by 34, 25, 28, 3, 1, 16, 7, and then 23. So you had two games that you could look back and say, hey, you know what? Couple plays here go differently. Maybe you don't lose at Cal. Maybe you upset Virginia. And they should have upset Virginia. They gave that game away. I remember watching that. It was a home game. And I think it went to overtime. They had so many chances to win that football game. But guess what? They're an undisciplined football team. And then, you have a 5-point win over Stanford. You only beat Charlotte 20-3. You had another win over Richmond. You beat Syracuse at Syracuse after the Steve Angeli era. So it's not even like you had good wins. You beat Stanford at home by 5. You beat a broken South Syracuse team on the road by 17. You beat Richmond and you beat Charlotte. And Charlotte might have been the worst team in college football, FBS, last year.
Yeah.
Like, they were terrible. They were 1-11. Their only win was over an FCS team. And if I'm not a single one of their 11 losses was by single digits. The closest loss they had was an 11-point loss to Rice at home.
Shout out to Rice.
Yeah. So, but that's the whole point. It's like, you didn't exactly have any good wins. You were closer to being 2-10 than you were 7-5 because you were so undisciplined. But your talent didn't speak to that. And so you're going to need a different football team. And the good news for North Carolina is they're going to have a different football team this year, because literally it's going to be a much different looking football team this year.
Yeah, without a doubt. One of the things that's going to benefit them too is what the makeup of their 2026 schedule looks like. Thankfully for them, they don't have to go through a gauntlet of, what Ohio State has to go through, or, but there's going to have to be some games in there that they play above their level. But one of the reasons why that we feel confident about them is, to your point, Brian, the level of talent that they're bringing in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I look at this portal class, Trev. It's just one of those things where I do think when I look at the different teams that Notre Dame is going to have this year, that's a common theme, right? It's a common theme is, hey, big portal class, it's got a chance to do this, this, and this, but you're going to need a bunch of guys to do this, this, or this, right? I mean, again, we're going to talk about some of these specific players. I do think they did a decent job last year at the high school level as well. They got a talented young quarterback last year. Signed a wide receiver from Michigan that was a 4-star recruit. They're doing a decent job of not. They got a kid that we liked last year, Xavier Griffin Haynes, who's a good player that they got last year. He big, tall, athletic edge player. So I thought they did a good job in high school, but they brought in 20 transfers. So they brought in a total of I think 41 high school kids and then 20 portal kids. So you have over 60 new players on your roster. So very different looking team this year, but some of the pickups we really like. So we're going to find out just who exactly they are this year, Trev. But it's going to absolutely have to come down to Bill Belichick's going to have to understand that, hey, you're now a college coach. You're not a pro coach, meaning you don't expect these guys to be disciplined because they're professionals. No, these are still kids. You have to teach them discipline. You have to instill discipline. You can't assume they know anything. That's the best advice I can give to a college coach. Don't assume these kids know anything. Teach them. Start football 101, and then if they have it all figured out, then you can fast forward. But that's the biggest thing he's going to have to learn. And if he can do that, Trev, there's some talent to work with here. And it's another portal class that a team's hoping to rebuild through the portal, but it's another portal class that has a chance, including with a very good high school class. Say this team might actually be something this year. Meaning like a team that could go play in a bowl game. And you look at their schedule, Trev, I've talked a little bit about this. It's doable. TCU on a neutral field is doable. Yeah, they blew them out last year, but we've seen teams get blown out one year and bounce back the following season. They have East Tennessee State at home. They have Syracuse at home, Miami at home, Louisville at home, NC State at home. All challenging games, but there's several winnable games in there. East Tennessee State should absolutely be a win. Miami will be difficult, but hey, we saw Miami lose to Louisville and SMU last year. I think they could be that kind of team. I don't think that they're going to win that game, but Syracuse at home should be a win. Louisville at home is capable of being a win. NC State at home is capable of being a win. At Pitt, at Duke, at UConn, at Virginia, all winnable games in the ACC. So competing for a bowl bid is not out of the question for North Carolina this year. It really isn't, but they're going to need to kind of put it all together. And, there's some opportunity there, Trev, for this football team, but there's also a lot for them to figure out.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Tough, but doable. Would you agree with that on the schedule?
Yeah, absolutely. They don't have just this unheard of gauntlet. I mean, we could talk about relative to the ACC, sure, but one of the benefits here as well is we're not going to have to wait long to see what type of discipline this Bill Belichick team in 26 is going to have, with having your first game of the season being in week 0 in Dublin, Ireland. We're going to get a real good idea. Hindsight's always 20/20, but you always go back and think about the 24 season with Florida State. Very undisciplined football game to start the season that year. And it was kind of a preview of things to come. So I'm very interested to see what happens with North Carolina against TCU.
I love that you said that, because we have seen I'd have to go back. Was there a game in Ireland in 2022? Can you check that for me real quick?
Yeah.
Because in the last 3 years, last year was Iowa State against Kansas State. Kansas State loses the game, undisciplined, lose by a field goal. Very disappointing season. 6-6. We were thinking they were going to contend for the Big 12 championship. Disappointing season. Year before, Georgia Tech and Florida State. Similar situation. 2024, Florida State coming off of a 13-1 season. They go out to Dublin. They lose to Georgia Tech 24-21. Very undisciplined game. Very disappointing season follows. And then obviously in 2023, you look at Navy, they didn't necessarily have an undisciplined game, but they just went on at Island and got beat and had a very disappointing season, 5-7 season. So the team that is, I don't know what this means. It may mean nothing. I'm simply pointing out that the team that has lost the game in Ireland to start the season, each of the last 3 years, the loser of that game has gone on to struggle in the regular season. Now the winners have had varying levels of success, but I do think that's pretty interesting, Trevor, to look at that and say, hey, who is going to be that this year? Who is going to be that team this year? Will it be TCU that kind of has that fall off, or is it going to be, North Carolina? Well, it's very fascinating. I don't see a game in Dublin in 2022.
In 2022, according to Wikipedia, at least the quick Google search that I did, it was Northwestern
in Nebraska.
Beat Nebraska.
Yep.
31-28, and Nebraska went on to go 4-8 that season.
Yep. So, dude, I'm telling you, if you're going to play in Ireland, you better flip and win.
Better come correct.
Because if you don't, your season is going to fall apart with a quickness. There's no doubt about it, but it is fascinating to kind of look at that. Again, I don't know what it means. It may mean nothing. I just think it's fascinating to look at. And I don't see one. I don't believe there was one in Dublin in 2021. I'm looking here, and I don't see a game in Dublin in week 1. So it is very interesting, Trev, to kind of look at all this and see. But that's kind of what North Carolina's got to do this season. So what's their FanDuel over under for North Carolina
for wins?
For wins, yeah. What's
their
4.5? 4.5.
Yeah.
It's interesting right now. I mean, what we know, take the under, but they're more than capable of going over. Let's talk a little bit about North Carolina, some things that we like about this football team. And the first thing is not going to surprise any of you based if you've been watching our show lately. The first one makes total sense. It's the front seven, especially the defensive line, but the front seven has got a chance to be pretty good this year.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about their defensive line specifically. I mean, they had 2 guys that were on some of our all-opponent teams. Brian, I know you had Isaiah Johnson on yours, and we both had Makard Abujade in both of our first teams. I mean, talk about a very, very productive player last year for North Carolina's defense. I mean, he was 47 tackles, 10.5 sacks. I mean, he was very, very impressive last year. He's going to be one of the best edge rushers
coming over from Delaware.
Yeah.
It's a first-year transfer guy, yeah.
he's going to be one of the best individual edge players that the Notre Dame tackles will face all season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 6'5". I mean, he's not like some sawed-off 6'2", 250-pound high-motor kid. You know, he's tall, long, solid athlete. Like, there's a lot to work. I think he had over 40 pressures, according to Pro Football Focus last year. There's definitely some things to work with. And then Isaiah Johnson's exactly what you want up the middle of your defense. Short and stout. 6'2", 320. I mean, just big, strong kid, you know, solid run defender, you know, can push the pocket back a little bit, but just a big, stout kid up the middle of the defense. Part of the reason he was on my second team all-opponent team is, as we talked about, there's not a lot of great D tackles in the schedule, but he's a solid football player. And then, when you go into year 2 of the system, and you say, hey, this kid's got a chance to do something. You know, they got a couple kids from Richmond to transfer in from last year, Trev. So I actually know the defensive coordinator at Richmond a little bit. His name's Justin Wood. Actually, he was a former player of mine, not my position, but he was a captain and a middle linebacker for us at Christopher Newport. And one of the smartest football players I've ever been around. Like, Justin is a wicked smart player. He's the linebacker coach and D coordinator at Richmond.
That's awesome.
And so they got a couple defensive players from Richmond that I think are have a potential to be good football players. They got a defensive end named Donovan Hoylett, who's again 6'4", 245 kid from Florida, had 13 tackles for loss last year, first team All-Patriot League. And then they had a linebacker who'll be a sophomore that reminds me a lot of, like, for them, what J.D. Bertrand was for Notre Dame. Kid named Peyton Seelman, who Justin coached. And again, I'm telling you, Justin Wood is a good football coach. Like, if you're a Power 4 school and you need a linebackers coach, give that kid a call. He's a D coordinator at Richmond. Right? He may not want it. He's kind of been in Virginia for a long time. He's a Virginia kid, played at CNU, now coaching at Richmond. But he's a good football coach. Good kid too. Well, he's not a kid anymore. He's in his 40s, but really good guy. But he's a good football coach, smart football coach. And this Peyton Seelman kid is a very good football player last year for Richmond. And the thing is, North Carolina saw both of these kids up close and personal. And, he had 120 tackles last year at Richmond. And so very, very good football player. Those two kids kind of stepping into what is already there is just one of the reasons that I think North Carolina has a chance, Trev, to have a pretty good front this season, and their depth is mixed between, like, there's only 3 guys in their front that are portal guys. So they got a lot of portal kids last year that are multi-year players, that are guys that aren't like one and done type of players. So we'll see. They got a kid, Derek McDonald from Syracuse, who got hurt last year, but 2 years before that played a bunch of football for Syracuse. So, like, I really like what they did in the portal. It's just, can they put it all together? That's really the question that they're going to have to answer next season is can they put it all together? But I think there's some tools there. I mean, a lot of length here. I mean, Derek McDonald is one of their starting inside linebackers. Like, I talked about Peyton Seelman being like J.D. Bertrand. He's like 6'1", 225, but he's the anomaly as far as size. Like, Derek McDonald, who, as I mentioned, came from Syracuse. He got injured last year, only played 4 games. The year before that, had 55 tackles. The year before that, at Syracuse, had 67 tackles, 4 tackles for loss. This is a kid that's played, in 2022, was a freshman, played 43 games as a true freshman. He'll be a 5th-year senior this year, and had 43 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. This is a veteran, good ACC football player. That's 6'4", 245. We talked a lot about, Isaiah Johnson is short but stout. And you talk about Donovan Hoylett, the transfer from Richmond, 6'4", 255. You talk about Mokart Abu Jayoudi, who's 6'5", 260. So, like, there's some size there. Leroy Jackson is 6'1", 290. He's a little on the smaller end on the inside, but, like, there's some length and some range. And you see a scouting department that's like, hey, we want the intangibles. Give us the tools, and then we'll coach them up.
I mean, the length also, to your point, is not just specific to the front 7. Their secondary also has some potential as well, and there's a lot of length there too. I mean, both of their corners are 6'1". One of their starting safeties is 6'4",
Greg
and the
Smith.
other kid's 6'2".
Yeah.
I mean,
a lot of length and range. And their defense was not terrible last year, Trevor. Like,
no.
They had some bad games, but their defense was not terrible last year. That's the side of the ball where I have the most optimism. And so when you look at this, our first 2 things we're concerned about, I talked about the front 7 and the length, and then you bring in the secondary. That's another area that we think is strength and strong. And then the final thing that kind of gives me some optimism is there's some potential from an offensive skill standpoint, Trev. I mean, you look at obviously Jordan Shipp, I believe was on your first team all opponent team last year, I believe, or this year, correct? Didn't you have him on your first team?
Yes, sir.
He's a kid that so what, 60 plus catches last year for North Carolina, and was a good football player. He was on, and you had him on your first team. I had him on my second, so it's not like I said, Trev, where'd that come from? Like, what are you talking about, dude?
Yeah.
They got another Patriot League kid from Lehigh, Mason Humphrey, 6'4". I think he's like 6'4", 215. Had some good production last year, over 40 catches, over 700 yards at Lafayette, or at Lehigh, excuse me. So he's an academic kid, clearly. Tretch Kakahuna from Wisconsin, transferred in, had 51 catches for 550 yards the last couple of years. Kid that's got some experience. So there's some skill there. Damon June, the running back last year as a freshman, had a real nice solid first year for North Carolina, 464 yards, 5.5 yards per catch, 17 catches. You've talked about him before, Trev. In the past for North Carolina. They got Caleb Jackson out of the portal from USC, or excuse me, LSU. Big kid, big old thick running back from LSU. So there's some potential skill there that if they can figure out something at the quarterback and the offensive line, they're going to be okay. And honestly, Trev, when you look at their concerns, that's the two biggest concerns right there: quarterback and offensive line. There's some potential on the offensive line, but also some big question marks as well. And, who are they going to be? I don't know. It's a great question. That's going to determine their season.
Yep, without a doubt. If offensive line can get shored up, and then one of Billy Edwards, who transferred in, or Miles O'Neill, who transferred in, I like some of the skilled talent. I mean, they also got Jackson Warren and Jelani Thurman out of the portal, Jordan Washington out of the portal, 3 tight ends. And if we know anything about a Bill Belichick-led offense, we know how much that dude likes his tight ends. So I'm going to be very interested to see what they do this year. But, yeah, I'm with you, man. It's a lot of it is just going to come down to the offensive line play, quarterback play.
And the last thing for me that's a little bit of a concern is there's a lot of rangy, tall players. But I do have questions about when it comes to how big of a jump they can make. They're good athletes. I don't see a lot of elite athletes on the roster. I think that's partly why they're going with length. Well, hey, if we can't get a 4'4" guy, let's get a 6'4" guy. You know what I mean? Like height versus speed. And so that's why they're going with the length. But when you're facing teams like Notre Dame, when you're facing teams like Miami, when you're facing teams like Clemson, they're also long, but also more dynamic athletically. That's when you're going to run into some problems. And so that's a little bit of a concern as far as like what is their ceiling going to be. Did some of your newcomers, did some of your year 2 guys, are they going to be able to kind of provide some of that juice that maybe you didn't have enough of last year? That's going to be a question mark as well. So Trev, let's get into, as we talk about North Carolina, let's get into season prediction time, right? We've talked a lot about them, strengths, concerns. I think this is a team that we're very intrigued by, but let's get into season prediction. And then of course we'll wrap things up with our final Notre Dame versus North Carolina prediction. So when you look at this North Carolina team, let's bring the schedule up again. It's a challenging schedule, but also a very doable schedule. So when you look at this North Carolina team, Trev, over under, you said win total is 4.5. Where do you see North Carolina finishing this year? What is your prediction for the Tar Heels?
Yeah, I'm having North Carolina finish with the over. I have them going 6-6 this upcoming season. I think that they're going to beat TCU. I think they beat East Tennessee State. I think that they're going to beat NC State because it's on the road. If there's one thing that we know about Dave Doran is when they play in Wolfpack Stadium or whatever it's called, they're lights out. The second they leave, they're very viable to get upset. So I have them beating NC State. I also have them beating UConn on the road. I also have them beating Syracuse at home. I think between Clemson on the road, Pitt on the road, Duke on the road, and Virginia on the road, I think they're going to be able to pull off an upset between one of those 4 games on the road. So I have them being bowl eligible in Bill Belichick's second season, and they're going bowling.
I'm going to make a twofold prediction for you, Trev. You're going to love this. You're like, dude, can't you just answer the question? Like, seriously. But here's where I'm at. I'm going to give you my prediction, but I'm going to tell you where I'm coming from because I think it all hinges on the first game. And so my prediction is going to be based off them winning the first game. So I will give you a prediction, but then I'm going to give you an alternate universe prediction as well.
Oh, okay.
I'm with you. I think they beat TCU in the opener, come back, get that bye, East Tennessee State. They head out to Clemson. They're going to lose that game, but it's going to be competitive. And that's going to help them say, hey, we're not that bad. They're going to get smacked by Notre Dame. So then they're 2-2. I think they're going to split the Pitt Duke games. Then they start kind of getting going. I think they're going to beat Syracuse, beat Miami. So they're sitting there at 4-4. Let's believe it where I have them. And here's where the finish is going to be. Okay, I think they're going to beat UConn on the road. I think they're going to beat NC State at home. And I think they split Louisville and Virginia. I think they win one and lose one. Gets them to 7-5. And it all comes down to that TCU game. So beat TCU, beat East Tennessee State, win one of Pitt or Duke, beat Syracuse, beat UConn, and then win 2 of the 3 between Louisville, Virginia, and NC State. So 7-5 is my prediction. However, if they lose to TCU, they'll go 3-9. They'll because then they beat East Tennessee State. Then they're going to get smacked by Clemson. They're going to get smacked by Notre Dame. Now you got to go on the road for 2 straight games on the road against Pitt and Duke. They absolutely collapse if they lose that first game. I think their whole season. No, I'm not saying the coaches should tell them this, because then they will collapse. But honestly, if they're not good enough to beat TCU after TCU kind of with who they're going to be on a neutral field, I think they're going to struggle. And I have them either 7-5 or 3-9. But 7-5 is my prediction. But if they lose that first game, they're gonna collapse.
Yeah, I think that is very, very fair. I'm with you completely.
Mm-hmm.
Very fair.
Yep. So that's the Tar Heels. Final thing, Trev, score prediction: Notre Dame versus North Carolina.
Yeah, I have Notre Dame winning this game 38-10, and I think the majority of the points for Notre Dame will be scored in the second half. This, I'm not going to say trap game, but this has the feel to it where Notre Dame could potentially overlook this North Carolina defense, which we think is a little bit better than what they are. So this will be one of those games where, you start off the month of September hot, you beat Wisconsin on the road, you're rolling, you just beat a rival in Michigan State and Purdue, and then you roll up on North Carolina on the road. It's a bigger road game than what it was in West Lafayette against Purdue, but I think this defense is a little bit better than what some may give it credit for. So I'm not going to say the Irish offense struggles early, but I think it takes them a little bit to get going. But I still think they bring home the win 38-10, and I also think North Carolina scores last.
Yeah, I get that. Notre Dame has played pretty well in North Carolina in recent years, and I think this game is going to be a lot like that. It's going to be a pretty pro Notre Dame crowd. I don't think North Carolina fans are going to be completely bought in yet because of wins over TCU and East Tennessee State coming off a loss to Clemson. I got 45-10. I'm getting my guy Spencer Porath a field goal every game, buddy. So I'm going 45-10. I think Notre Dame's going to get off to a little bit of a slow start just because North Carolina does some things interestingly on defense. It's you're looking at it in a couple other ways, Trev. It's like, okay, it's a team that you're not really kind of worried about, and you're starting to a little bit look forward to kind of what's coming down the road. You got Stanford at home. Second game on the road. You're starting to feel good about yourself. You come out a little bit sloppy. It's tended to be kind of wet when Notre Dame goes out and plays in North Carolina for whatever reason. I think the last 2 games have had some rain. 2 of the last 3 games have had some rain. So yeah, you've had that bad luck with some weather. See, I'm doing the opposite. I'm not saying, it's going to be great weather. I'm saying it's been just a lot of things there, Trevor. I could see Notre Dame coming out a little bit sluggish against a pretty solid defense.
Yeah,
but that doesn't last very long, and Notre Dame eventually gets rolling. And this game looks a lot like what it should have been in 2022. Where it should have been like 45-14, and they just let a couple bombs get thrown late in the game. Like it's going to be like that because at the end of the day, Notre Dame is still going to overwhelm the North Carolina offense, and that they don't have the athletes to beat Notre Dame on the perimeter, and they don't have the guys up front to block them, and that's why I think ultimately, even though the offense is a little bit sluggish early, I think the defense really dominates, and I think the 10 points includes a late field goal or touchdown in that game.
I'll add a little bit of fun real quick to the end of this prediction because I'm in a good mood today. I think the thing that's going to get the offense going in this game is a big run by Kedron Young.
Oh,
I think
nice. Okay.
that is what's going to generate the offense, because you'd be like, hey, CJ Carr's been ripping up some teams early in the season, and they're starting to get a hold of, like, they're starting to get an idea of what Notre Dame wants to do offensively. Kedron Young will be back to health. Will be a month removed from the start of the season. I think he rips off a big run to get the offense going.
All right. So Notre Dame beat North Carolina, and the last time they played was 2022, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then they played again in 2020, 2021 and 2020. And then after that, was 2017 the most recent game after that? Can you remember? But I'll say this. Notre Dame running backs. Let me just look this up because I want to make sure that I get this correct. I want to make sure I'm not missing a game, but this is just I'm doing some research on the fly here, guys, because I think I'm right on this. But Notre Dame running backs, to your point, Trev, tend to feast on North Carolina. When they played in 2022, Audric Estime ran for 134 yards, 2 touchdowns. Chris Tyree had 80 yards rushing and a touchdown. Logan Diggs had 50 yards rushing. And Logan Diggs had 3 catches for 65 yards and a touchdown. So and then Chris Tyree had 4 catches for 24 yards. You had 3 running backs that went over 100 yards of offense in that game. That was 2022. In 2021, we remember Kyron Williams runs for 199 yards. Logan Diggs runs for 42, and Kyron has a 91-yard touchdown run in that game. They played in 2020, and Kyron again, 124 yards, 2 touchdowns in that game. Kyron goes off. He also has 4 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown. He goes off. 2017, Notre Dame goes down to North Carolina. They rip him up. 2 running backs go over 100 yards. Deion McIntosh has 124 yards on 12 carries, 2 touchdowns, and Josh Adams had 118 yards on 13 carries, had a 73-yard touchdown. So that prediction is going to look pretty good, Trev, because that's just been the nature when Notre Dame plays North Carolina, the running backs eat. And I don't see anything about this game that's going to change. I'm actually curious about the Notre Dame North Carolina game in 2014. That's the last time they played, and I know it was a higher scoring game.
Had a good game, if I remember. Yeah, I was there.
That was a high scoring game. Yeah, Torian had 98 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rushing, he had 71 yards receiving on 5 catches and 1 rush touchdown reception. So he had 169 yards of offense on 23 carries and 3 touchdowns. So yeah, running backs feast against North Carolina. It's just been a tradition. So I had that gut, and I was like, let me see if I'm right on this. Let me do the research and see if I'm right on this. And
yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. Yep. So big win for the Irish. But I do think this is an improved North Carolina team as long as they win the opener. That's the key. If they lose the opener, Notre Dame, this game will look more like Purdue 2 years ago. Honestly, it'll look more like Arkansas last year. If they lose that game and they're coming into this game 1-2 with a loss to, with a win over East Tennessee State, Notre Dame will annihilate them because they'll be on the verge of quitting. That's why I say that.
Brian, to take us home today here in the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We have a daily mailbag to take us the rest of the way. Now, if this does happen to be your first mailbag, you can put MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji. Lets us know to set your question aside. We would prefer questions about the topics that we covered today. So star power on Notre Dame's offense, best quarterbacks on their schedule, just previewed North Carolina. And then obviously Super Chats also get bumped up to the top.
It's going to be a quick one today, Trev. We don't have a lot of questions in there today, but we'll kick things off with Aiden Banami.
There is not an opposing quarterback that Todd McShay would talk about like he is with CJ right now.
I mean, Aiden, it's true, but if you listen to the show he did yesterday, there's not a quarterback in the country that he'll talk about like he talks about CJ. So that's not really like you may not mean it this way, but it's kind of like dismissing the entire show because none of them are as good as CJ. So like, who cares? We think CJ is going to be the best quarterback in college football this year, but that doesn't mean that the opponents aren't very good. And it's more reason why CJ needs to be on his game this year because they are going to play some good quarterbacks this year. But no, I would agree with that, especially since I don't think anyone on their schedule other than Mensa was at the Peyton Manning thing. I don't know of any. I don't know I don't think Colton Joseph was. I don't. So I have
No.
to go look at the list, but I don't remember. I saw like a quick list and kind of looked at it, and yeah.
Yeah, of them on Notre Dame's opponents, I would have thought Kevin Jennings and Darian Mensah would have been, but I'm not sure if they were.
Yeah. I'm actually going to look that up. So it's called the Manning Academy, right?
The Manning Passing Academy.
Okay, let me see here. Manning Passing Academy. Because I know they had a kid like from North Dakota there, and there's a lot of different kids there, but I don't remember seeing that particular player there. So I have to find the whole list. But yeah, like Drake Lindsay was there. Yeah, there was a good number, but I have to go find it. Yeah.
I found an article on Yahoo Sports. It says that Bear Bachmeier was invited, but I don't know if he went.
Okay. Yeah, I have to try to find the list, but yeah, here's college attendees announced. Huh?
No.
What'd you say?
Brendan Sorsby withdrew.
Yeah. He said
it also looks like
go ahead.
Darian Mensah declined his invite.
Okay. So it's Julian Sane, Arch Manning, Trinidad Chambliss, CJ Carr, Jaden Maeva, Gunnar Stockton, Kevin Jennings was there, CJ Bailey, Marcel Reed, the kid from Cal, Drew Mestamaker, Damon Williams were some of the guys there. There was also a kid from North Dakota State. Like there's some guys here that Yahoo lists, but they're clearly not the entire list because he doesn't have Malik Washington listed. He doesn't have Kamarian Taylor listed. So Jerry Kaminsky from North Dakota State, he didn't list. John Mateer was there. He didn't list him. So it's Connor Wegman was there. He didn't list him. So it's an incomplete list, but looks like Kevin Jennings was the only guy on Notre Dame's schedule that was there that we can tell.
Good deal.
Yep.
Another one from IDEN. The way CJ talks about the upcoming year, do you think the offense will be all gas, no brakes, and the Notre Dame offense truly airing it out?
No, I mean, not in the way that you think. I don't think that anything CJ has said makes us think that they're going to go out there and throw the ball 45 times a game. I think they're going to still be a balanced offense. Are they going to be more built around the ability to throw the football? Absolutely, as you should be when you have a kid like CJ Carr as your quarterback. But airing it out with like 4 Gs? No, I don't think they're going to be that. I think they're going to be very dynamic throwing the football, but I don't think this is going to be like, hey, man, who is this, Mike Denbrock or Mike Leach? What's going on right now?
Right.
It's not going to be that, right? It's not going to be that. They're still going to be able to run the football.
Without a doubt. From Jay Melvin, Brian, from what you've heard, do you think Mylan Graham will be a star this year at wide receiver? I remember when we got him, the biggest question you had about him wasn't his talent, but his motor.
That's still a question. I mean, he did well. A good first spring. But now it's like, hey, carry that into the fall. And do I think he will be a star? I have no idea. I am not going to predict the kid that had 6 catches in 2 years to be a star. But as we said at the beginning of the show, does he have the potential to be a star? Absolutely. He's got the potential to be an outstanding football player for Notre Dame this year. Whether that is as like the guy in the offense, where he's the leading receiver and has star, production, he's 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns and all that, or is it just as part of a great unit, he has some star performances that remains to be seen. But he's got the tools to do so, but so does Quincy Porter. So does Elijah Burris. So does Micah Gilbert. So does Cam Williams. And some of the freshmen have chances to be impact players as freshmen, on top of course, the 2 veterans that we already know about in Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse. So that's part of the reason why my optimism about this unit is so much stronger than it has in the past. Because if Mylan Graham doesn't pan out, but this guy do, then they're going to be fine. If he does pan out and this guy doesn't, but also this guy and this guy does, then they're going to be fine. They're going to be really good. That's the whole margin for error thing, where it's not like if Lorenzo Styles is good this year, Notre Dame's going to be really good. If he's not, it's going to be a long year. We're not in that world anymore. And that's a good thing. It's a very good thing. We were kind of in that world last year. I mean, if Malachi Fields gets hurt in the 3rd game, Notre Dame's passing game looks very different last year.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, man, the margin for error for this team is something that we've talked about. The gap is just significantly wider to all the things that you listed out. But in my opinion, there's only one wide receiver to me that is not in show me mode, and that's Jordan Faison. Jaden Greathouse needs to show me that he can be healthy. And Graham, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, players like that need to show me that they can carry this over into the regular season, because We've seen Micah Gilbert, with all due respect, be the offseason warrior where, in spring and in fall camp, he looks dominant. And then issues come up during the season. They're in show me mode with that. So, yeah, that's where I'm at with Mylan Graham. Could he be a star? Absolutely. But you could fill in 5 different names and replace it with Mylan Graham, and it wouldn't surprise me if they became a star this year.
Yep. Here's got a super chat just popped in.
From Reliq, appreciate the super chat. Fellas, what is the single least discussed position group that is the biggest impact on whether this team goes 10-2 versus 13-0?
These are always hard questions for me because I feel like when you're talking about this question, and Reliq, correct me if I'm wrong, add context if I'm wrong, it's who everybody else is talking about, not enough or too much or whatever. But I feel like I don't listen to other shows. I mean, I got sent the Todd McShay thing yesterday, enjoyed watching it, but like, unless somebody sends me something, I'm not listening to it. I'm not listening to what, other Notre Dame podcasters are talking about. I'm not listening to what, national people are talking about very often. Sometimes I will if they're talking about Notre Dame, but like, I don't know what position group is not being talked about. We've literally done 2 different offseason previews of every position group on the team. So I'm not quite sure what that's referring to, but I'll say this. So I think you're meaning like big picture. I will say this. I have not heard many people, whether it's the preseason magazines or whether it's, people that I talk to that maybe aren't Notre Dame fans or whatever else, that talk a lot about the tight ends. And I think the tight ends honestly could be a unit like this that isn't talked about. Like, O-line is going to have a big impact, but they're talked about all the time. Quarterback, receivers are talked about all the time. D-line's talked about all the time. Linebacker, DBs are talked about all the time. We don't talk a lot about the tight ends. And I think that group could be the difference between this being a 10-2 team because they struggle to run the football in some of the bigger games, or a 13-0 team that's going into the semifinals, undefeated, because they're going to have a big say in, number one, just how good Notre Dame is running the football. And number 2, they're going to be able to add some juice or into the pass game that makes this team really hard. So maybe they only catch 25, 30 balls, but it's impactful 25, 30 balls, or they struggle to get open. It's one less position that the defenses have to worry about defending in the pass game, and it makes it easier to shut down some of those other receivers. I think this offense being special this year, if it is as good as Trev and I think it's going to be, we're going to look back and be like, they didn't have monster numbers like Michael Mayer was here. But if you break down games, 87 and 88 are going to be monsters in the run game and still make some plays in the pass game. So I think tight end is the one. I'm not just saying that because we always, talk about, tight end or of course they're going to be good. I mean, we're not talking about Notre Dame as much as tight end. Trev thought I was going to talk about because Trev loves tight ends, but I wasn't going to say that.
Trev, I'll say it.
I will.
I'm just waiting for you to be done. Don't worry. I'll talk about it.
Give me 5-6 more minutes. No, I'm just kidding. But I think that's the group that I look at and say they don't get talked about a lot, but they're going to be very, very important to, not in the sexy way, to how good this team is going to be this year.
That I agree with wholeheartedly. The other position that I don't know if it's going to impact whether they go 10-2 or 13-0 enough, but one player that we kind of forget that was also a big departure from last year's team was James Rendell. Mm-hmm. He was money last year. I mean, he had 25 punts last year. 13 of them were down inside of the 20-yard line. His average was 44.6. I mean, he was a big factor in Notre Dame. He was not a big factor, but he was a factor in Notre Dame's defense turning around, playing the field position game. So he's a piece. I would not say that because James Rendell is not on the team, I don't know if they go 10-2 versus 13-0, but he is a player that I don't think enough people talk about. So he's in that conversation for me. But wholeheartedly agree with tight ends.
Yep. Let's get to the next one, Trev. We've got one from Beezer12 Washingbeard.
What does Cam Williams need to do to put it all together?
Be more assertive. Be someone who has a greater understanding of what it means to perfect your craft, to work on your craft. It's not about being stronger. It's not necessarily about being more explosive. It's about the little nuances of the game, the little tricks of the trade. I mean, you think of a guy like Avery Davis, who's 3-4 inches shorter than Cam Williams, lighter than Cam Williams, not nearly as explosive athletically as Cam Williams, played quarterback in high school, but he turns himself into a pretty darn good receiver in Notre Dame. Why? He said he watched videos on YouTube of guys playing receiver. Now, don't even get me started on the fact that a Notre Dame receiver had to watch videos on YouTube to learn how to run routes, but that's where they were back in the day. But the whole point is Avery cared about, he understood this is a position is one where there's a craft to it. There's nuance to it. It's not just about, hey, I'm 6'4", 225 and run a 4.4. Yeah, that's fine. That's great. Those guys can get away with that. Nobody else can. You've got to really be a master at your craft. And you look at some of the great receivers that just weren't physical freaks like Julio Jones and A.J. Green and Michael Floyd, guys like that. There was a DK Metcalf, guys like that. They've had to be great at their craft. Devontae, you watch the evolution of Devontae Smith as a route runner throughout his entire career. It's a thing of beauty.
Yeah.
It was so much fun to watch him develop. He was always explosive and athletic. I mean, heck, his freshman year, he hit the game-winning touchdown pass in the national championship game. It's not like he was like some nobody. He was a top 100 caliber recruit, but he became an elite, just like you can't defend him because of his ability to master the ins and outs of playing the position. And some guys are just so gifted and the game comes so easy that what they think is working hard is not really working hard. And then there's the confidence level. And that's the thing is Cam just to say, look, I don't need the coach to do this for me. I don't need to do this. I don't need to do that. This is up to me. I need to go out there and do this every day. I need to grab CJ for extra work. I need to grab so-and-so to do some extra schooling. I need to get with Great House and Faison and say, hey, man, teach me this, teach me that, work with me on this. I need to, sitting up in the room and I got one of two choices. I can go hang out, go to the party, go to the club, or you know what? There's these really cool series of YouTube videos of great wide receivers talking about, great press releases. And I'm going to watch those and work on those tomorrow in some of my extra time. That's up to you. You don't need coach. If Mike Brown is the most and he's not, if he is the most useless receiver coach ever and just refuses to work with Cam Williams can still every single day spend, a ton of time working on his craft. Talk to the veteran receivers, talk to your high school coaches. Talk about people they may know, look at YouTube, call me, whatever. There's so many resources that is available to these kids that can work with them. It's just about whether or not you really want to do it. Do you really want to be great or not? And what I mean, do you want to be great? Everyone's going to say, yes, I want to be great. What I mean is, if you want to be great, don't tell me, show me. And that's really what Cam's got to learn to do. And just that it's an assertiveness also when he's out there. Give me have that dog about you. I want to be that guy. Every snap, just have the mindset, you can't guard me, and I'm going to play like it.
Surround yourself with other dudes. I agree with everything that you said. The only thing that I would add is be in the hip pocket of Jaden Greathouse. Be in the hip pocket of Jordan Faison. Be in the hip. The amount of resources, to your point, that are available to. Go sit down with Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter. See what they learned during their time in Columbus. There is so much.
What'd you guys do on press release stuff?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. All of that. Agreed.
And here's the thought: study guys. I used to, when I was getting into coaching, man, I would watch so much of Miami's receivers because they had a receivers coach at the time named Curtis Johnson, who I thought was a master at teaching the position. So, man, I'd study Santana Moss. Okay, man, that's what sinking your hips looks like. So that's okay. This find players that are built like you and have a game like you and study their game. Don't go watch Tutu Atwell if you're Cam Williams because you're not Tutu Atwell. But watch Cooper Kupp. He's got a similar body type to you. Watch some of the more vertical oriented. Watch Devontae Adams and just kind of pick up things and then go try to apply it. Work on it in practice. First time you do it, you're going to get jammed. Your ribs are going to get busted up and bruised because Leonard Moore is going to be all over you because you're not going to know what to do. But then you practice it every single day. You get better at it. Next thing you know, he goes for that jam. Whoop, see ya. Peace out, Leonard. And there's not a player in the roster that Cam Williams can't run by if he gets a step on you. So it's just about how bad does he want it? How bad does he want it? Because if he goes out, if Mike Brown and Mike Denberg are like, Cam Williams going to help us. Let's just say they had that mindset. He's not going to help us. He's done. if he goes out there and balls out in practice, well, he's running third team. Yeah, okay, dominate the third team guys. And then all of a sudden I'm like, well, let's get him up on the second. Dominate the second team guys. And guess what? They're going to play you. It's not like there's some personal thing. I'll tell you for a fact. I know this for a fact. As a young man, the Notre Dame coaches love Cam Williams. Love him. So there's no like animosity. That kid's a punk. And they love him as a kid. They're all hoping he breaks out. So if he shows that, then they're going to play him. It's not like they're just now they may not be making the extra time that I wish they'd make for him, with a kid with his ability, but they're also probably, hey, this is Notre Dame. How bad do you want it? I mean, I understand that, but it needs to be a little bit of both, right? And that's on the coaching side of it. But even if they don't do any of that, if he goes out there and balls out, they're going to play him. That's a reality. And that's why I'm just not really ready to write him off yet. Now, if he doesn't step up this year, okay. I don't see it happening next year. But I am still fingers crossed. Oh, come on, Cam. Come on, Cam. Because, hey, he's a great kid, but it's just even if he wasn't, or if I didn't know, you can't deny the talent. We watched Aiden Pouncey all spring look great. And then we watched Cam Williams beat him so bad that Aiden just fell down. I mean, if he didn't fall down, Cam was running by. He was smoking him off the line. It's like, it's still there. Just, is it 1 every 10 snaps or is it 8 out of every 10 snaps? That's the difference. Good question. Got another one from Beezer.
Can the Irish win it all if their wide receiver room turns out to be not a top 15 room?
Yeah, it's kind of like the conversation we had the other day. Can they win it all if CJ Carr gets hurt? Yeah. Is it way harder? Yeah. Is it likely? No. Does it require everyone else to play way better? Yeah. Well, the receiver room not being in the top 15 isn't even as bad as that. It's like, yeah, you can. They got to the title game 2 years ago with the receiver room that was not in the top 15. Last year, their receiver room was in the top 10. First of all, if they don't finish in the top 15, I'll be shocked. And be like, I don't know if they got the right people here leading this thing. But I mean, they were in top 15 last year, in my opinion, especially when Greathouse was still playing, because at least you had some depth there. But I look at it, Trev, and yeah, you can, but it's just going to require CJ's going to have to play out of his mind. The run game's going to have to be dominant. The tight ends are going to have to step up. Defense is going to have to be elite. If all those things are true, yeah, they can still win it. But the margin for error gets way smaller if they're not top 15. Way smaller.
Agreed.
Here's one, Trev. I'm going to ask this one. I want to get your thoughts on it, Trev. It says, from Jim Halloran, which unit gels and becomes more cohesive sooner, O-line or D-line?
And that is including defensive end?
Meaning like the entire defensive line, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to say offensive line because there's not as much rotating as there is on the defensive line. When you're trotting out with the first team offensive line, it's from left to right should be Will Black, Anthony Knapp, Ashton Craig, Sullivan Absher, and Gerby Lambert. That's just your first team offensive line. There is no like, hey, I know we're going first team defense, but we're going to put Keon in instead of Bryce Young for this drive because it's more focused for run. That doesn't mean that the D line won't gel. I just think that the offensive line becomes more cohesive sooner than the D line because there's just naturally, because of the positions that they play, there's more continuity.
I'm going to go the opposite. I think early in fall camp, it's D line just because the D line requires less actual gelling. The offensive line has to gel. The defensive line is just kind of just do your job. Like you don't have to worry about. Because, here's a perfect example. There's a little bit of timing on it, but at the end of the day, on the D-line, even a twist and a stunt, which is the most cohesive thing that a defensive line does, it's still you do your job, you do your job. There's no feel. I shoot the A gap as quickly as I can, or I shoot the B gap as quick as I can, and that guy's got to loop around me with a certain technique. We don't necessarily need to be on the same page. It works better when we are, but me being good at doing what I do is not dependent on what he does. Now the success may be dependent on what he does, but I can still do my job without it. But then you look at an offensive lineman, there's so much more feel. So we're working on the double team. Me and Trevor working on the double team. We're working up to the second level. I've got to feel him. I've got to sense him. Okay, he's here, so I can go here, or I've got to wait on it because he's not there yet. So we got to stay on this double team. There's so much more. I can't do my job without him. He can't do his job without me. That we've got to communicate. There's more of this. There's more of that. There's so much that you have to do to be on the same page as an offensive line that's beyond what you need on the defensive line. Now, again, you want the defensive line on the same page. The more they work together, the more they learn each other, then those twists and stunts become even more just quick and explosive and difficult. But it's still, at the end of the day, them doing their job. And one guy could do his job and still make a play if the other guy doesn't. Where if one guy doesn't do his job on the offensive line, neither guy does his job. It's just because of the type of blocking that you're doing in a lot of instances. So I'll go there. I think, to Trev's point, because there's so much new on the D line, I understand that, but I still think with Ashton Craig stepping in center, I still think just in general, defense usually tends to be ahead of the offense. But if there was going to be a year where the offense is going to be ahead of the defense from a line play, I think this would be the year for the reasons that Trevor talked about. Because there's a lot of rotating guys working in, new guys that are still kind of getting their feet wet, and where the offensive line is kind of like a lot more coming back that not only played a bunch, but there's two guys that played a bunch for Notre Dame on the D-line that never played at Notre Dame before, though. So it's going to be interesting. I really hope we get a lot of spring or fall camp access. I don't think we will, but I hope we do, because I can't wait to watch those guys come battle at practice, especially in the future. Oh my gosh, when like the 27 classes are on. Boy, man. Here's a good one.
From Sine, Cosine, Tangent. Brian, did you know how good the 2017 offensive line was before the season started? What comparisons can you draw between that offensive line and this year's offensive line, if any?
Well, I don't know that I really concern myself with comparing them to 2017 yet, but I'll try to answer the question. Did you know they were going to be good on the offensive line in 2017? Yes. Did we know they were going to be that good? No, because here's the thing. They were so dominant over the defensive line in spring that and early in fall camp that we honestly thought this Notre Dame defense is going to be trash. You got to remember what we had just watched the year before. So we're going out to practice, and Josh Adams is ripping off 60-yard run after 60-yard run after 60-yard run. And Dexter Williams is doing the same thing. Tony Jones Jr. is doing the same thing. And you're like, this defense sucks. I mean, we're literally talking about that in the sense like this defense sucks. Now, part of it was you could tell the offensive line was good, but it's like, dude, you shouldn't be ripping off this many long runs in practice. Like, I'm sorry. Like, usually the defense is ahead of the offense, as I mentioned. We're seeing it in the spring. We saw it again in fall camp. And I remember a conversation I had with Mike Elko. He's like, we're actually okay right now. Like, yeah, we're still learning, but we're actually okay right now. So what do you mean you're okay? He says, that line that we're going against every day, he called them human lie detectors one time at a press conference. But the thing he and I were talking about was like, they're so good that they're exposing every mistake that we make, which is great. Because now our guys know in order to do anything against that line, we've got to be perfect. We've got to do this. We've got to do that. He goes, and we're coming along. We're not going to face another line like that all year. And not even close. Like, I remember, it was post-practice. I think he called him like a human lie detector, where like if you make any kind of mistake, they're going to expose you for it. That's how good that line was. And come to find out, that's exactly what they were. And the defensive line ended up being okay that year. So we kind of knew they were going to be really good. I don't know that we knew that they were going to be like this generational line, but we thought they were going to be very good early in the, and then of course, after the first game, you're like, holy moly. He was not kidding, because they went for like 4-something on Temple, and then they went for like 5-something on BC. And you got to remember, BC had 2 high NFL draft picks on their D-line in 2017, and Zach Allen and Harold Landry.
Harold Landry.
And they went for over 500 yards rushing in that game on those guys. 2 different backs over 200 yards. It's like, okay, these guys are ridiculous. Just ridiculous. So, yeah, we had a pretty good idea they were going to be good. What comparisons can you make? I think this is a good chance this is going to be their biggest line since then.
Yes.
Like, that's a thing. When you talk about just from a size standpoint, they've got a chance to be really big. There's an opportunity for this to be the most athletic line since then. Not the most experienced line since then. There's been other lines that were more experienced. 2020 was very experienced offensive line, but like 2020 was just a bunch of guys that you were just like, dude, they're going to do their job at a high level. And then Aaron Banks, who was the one guy that could just physically dominate people. But like Jarrett Patterson, Lee Meichenberg, Robert Hainsey, and Tommy Kramer, it's like, dude, those guys just do their job every snap. They're so good at just doing their job, but they weren't destroyers. They weren't guys that just crushed people like 2017 was, and like 15 was at times. But they just did their job at a high level every game. This line has the tools to be like that dominator line where they just whoop people and just physically whoop people game after game. Now, does that mean they're going to be as good as 2017? I don't think so. Because in 2017, I mean, Quentin Nelson was like 340. Alex Bars was like 330. Tommy Kramer was a pretty big kid at right tackle on that team. Mustafa was a veteran. McGlinchey was a 3-year starter. Q was a 3-year starter. Bars was a 2-year starter who had also started 2 games in 2015 when Q went down. Mustafa was a 2-year starter. Kramer and Hainsey were the new guys, but they were both very talented. And that's before Tommy's injuries really took over and just kept him from being the guy that he could have been if it wasn't for all the injuries. But he was really good in 2017. I still remember the play. Trev, you'll remember this. When they're playing Michigan State, who had the number 2 run defense in the country that year. The first half, they just ran an inside zone play. And remember that defensive end they had? What was that kid's name? Oh man, he was considered one of the best DNs in the country. Oh man, give me a second. He was very good that year. Just hold on. I'm going to look it up. I can picture the guy, but I just can't remember his name. Just give me a second. Kenny Willekes. That's who it was. And he was an all Big Ten kid that, had 14.5 tackles for loss that year. The next year was at 20.5, 16 tackles for loss. I remember there's a play where they ran inside zone away from him, and Tommy Kramer took him and drove him all the way to Quentin Nelson and buried him. And Josh Adams cut right behind him. Inside zone, cutting behind the backside tackle. And it was a vertical cut. And that was Tommy Kramer, your 5th lineman of 5 at the you know what I mean? And whether it was him or Haynes, who was there on the field, their 5. Like, they just were physically dominant. And I think this line has a chance to be their most physically dominant since then. That doesn't mean I expect them to be that. Gerby Lambert is going into Mike McGlinchey's, 2016 season from an experience standpoint. Anthony Knapp's the only guy going into his 3rd year as a starter, as a full-time starter. They had 2 guys doing that year in Q and McGlinchey. And then Musford played a lot of football, and Bars had, 4 of the 5 were returning starters. This year, it's like you've got, 2 returning starters that were full-time, another guy that started half a year, another guy that started half a year, another guy that's new. So it's a little bit different. But as far as style of play, I think that's where I think there's a fair comparison. Size and style of play, this is where you can start drawing some comparisons. The other thing is Joe Rudolph Harry Hiestand? Can he develop this unit to be dominant the way that Harry Hiestand did? That's a question that remains to be seen.
Very true.
I know you had some thoughts on that, Trev. I saw you a couple times. You're ready to jump in. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I definitely agree on the size comparison. This is going to be one of the biggest Notre Dame offensive lines that they've had since 2017. Agreed completely. They have a ways to go before we can definitively say that they are comparable to the 2017 offensive line, but there are some things that we're starting to see preseason. A lot of it's going to be hedging on Ashton Craig remaining healthy for more than 6 games, because I don't believe that this offensive line can't reach its full ceiling without him. That doesn't mean they'll be bad. I just don't think they can reach their full ceiling without him.
One thing that I would say comparing 2017 to 2026 is in 2017, Trev, like I said, we knew right away, game 1, Temple, holy moly. This team is going to be nasty. Like this is just a wow. Like I can't believe that they just dominated the team like that and just physically destroyed them. 400 plus. I'm actually looking it up now. It's like beat them 49-16 and ran for 422 yards on only 44 carries. They went out the next week against Boston College, or Georgia was the next week, but then they went out the next game. And the line played better against Georgia than people realized. The backs were terrible that game. They made terrible cuts all game. There was one play, I've talked about this. If Josh Adams follows Mike McGlinchey outside on a pull, he might house it. But then against BC, 515 yards on 51 carries. I mean, it was ridiculous. They went for over 180 yards against Michigan State, who had the number 2 rush defense in the country that year. I mean, it's just, you talk about the NC State game, Trev, where they went over 300 yards that game rushing. Josh went for 202. They ended up with 318 on 54 carries against a team that had 4 NFL draft picks that were drafted in the 4th round or higher on their D line, and their middle linebacker was a 3rd round NFL draft pick that started in the Super Bowl a couple years ago. I mean, just USC had multiple NFL players. They rushed for 377 yards, 8 yards a carry. North Carolina, they rushed for 341 yards and played most of the game without Alex Bars. Miami of Ohio, they rushed for 333 yards on 39 carries. I mean, just every week. I don't know that this line is going to be there, and this team won't run as much as that team. They don't have a mobile quarterback like that team had. But I think there may come a time later in the year where we look back and say, okay, they've hit their stride and they're blocking at a very high level since 2020 or 2017, but it won't be I don't think, from like day one like they were in 2017. And a lot of that's because of that experience that we talked about. That's my 2 cents. But 15 and 17 were 2 dominant offensive lines. The 2 best offensive lines of the last 30 years, in my opinion, were those 2 offensive lines. And a lot of the same. I mean, McGlinchey was in both of them. Q was in both of them. And then, of course, Harry Hiestand was part of both of them.
From Timecone, please comment, because of the large amount of ACC competition, Miami, SMU, and Notre Dame will all score 400 points in the 12-game regular season. Yeah,
I mean, I think Miami's going to easily do that. I think Notre Dame's going to easily do that. We've said this before, Trev. I think Miami is going to look a lot more like their 2024 offense than their 2025 offense.
I would seriously hope that Notre Dame averages 33.3 points per game.
Yeah.
After averaging 42.
Yeah. And that's basically what they are. That would be for 12 games. And then SMU is a little bit closer to that, but I think SMU will be there as well. They were 5 points away from that last year in the regular season. And I think they'll be better this year than they were last year on offense.
Yep.
So, yeah, I would expect that.
From Daily Comments, a resident Miami fan in the chat. This is a fun question. If you had to pick a team to have a field like Boise State, what team would you pick and what color would you make the field?
I mean, this is a little bit kind of egotistical. You're calling your own question fun. Shouldn't we be the ones that decide whether this is a fun question?
I'm not having any fun, Daily.
I'm having no fun. No, this is actually a good one. First of all, I just want to say I hate the colored fields. Like, I'm against the colored fields. But if we were going to say, okay, let's just have some fun with it. We're going to like be the NBA and we're just going to have these gross fields that are like the team's colors, right? I think Washington with a purple field with gold lines would be one that is the first one that popped in my head. I'm just calling them the ones that pop in my head. Like a purple field with like gold, white lines with like gold numbers with white outline, I think would actually look sweet if I was into that type of thing. That's the first one that popped in my head, Trev. Somebody in the chat said Penn State having a white field on their whiteout game. Penn State would do something lame like that. They really would do something stupid and lame like that, but that would be terrible. But yeah, Washington's the first one that pops into my head with the purple field. You have the white lines, but then like the gold numbers on the lines with the white outline, I think would look pretty snazzy. Can you think of any? Syracuse would an all orange field.
I'm more so with you. I do not like colored fields. I mean, when I saw this question come in, I was like, Notre Dame, because green is one of their primary colors. I'd like the football team to play on the green field.
Notre Dame does it every game, baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oregon, their field's always the color of their uniform, gold, green. Jim Halloran's trying to stroke. He's trying to get me like going today, Trev. He's trying to poke the bear. He said Maryland with the checkered pattern, because you know how much I hate when Maryland just barfs their field on their flag onto different things. It kills me. But yeah, so there's a high school in Michigan think it's St. Mary's that has like a red field. I think Eastern Washington used to have like a red field. Those look disgusting. Like a red, like a bright red field. It looks like a pool of blood. I hate it. There are some other colors you could get away with, though, in my opinion. Like, as I mentioned, I think that Washington could get away with a purple field to a degree. Wonder how hot it would be in August or September. Would be curious, but think of some. I mean, if Texas wanted to go burnt orange on the field, I guess that would make a lot of sense. But it'd have to be some team where like the color is like part of what the iconic aspect of them. You know, like Tennessee with the orange, something like that. I'd like a brighter color for the most part, except for, like I said, that purple would look good. But any team with royal blue, because they could just copy what Navy does. So Air Force, Duke, yeah, any team like that could do that. But I'm not a fan at all of the colored fields at all. Cubs like I don't even want to engage.
No,
I don't even engage.
I don't like. I'm sorry. I know I'm probably amongst the minority in that, but I think it looks tacky. I don't like it. Another one from Daily Comments here, so hoping we have more fun on this one. Who is this year's cheetah package, third down package for pass rush? Mainly, who are the 4D linemen they bring in?
That is going to be much tougher to decipher this year than in the past. I think part of it is if we're talking this package, this is more of like the third and long or 2-minute drill type of you're going to throw the ball. The givens, Boubacar is going to be a given.
Yep.
I would imagine Bryce will be a given. I think the only question mark with Bryce is he outside or is he inside? I think it'd be inside. Is Kingston healthy? Because if Kingston's healthy, he's in the game as part of this package. It'll either be 3 down and him as the fourth, or he's just playing defensive line. After that, I think there's a little bit more of a question. Is it Ronnie Dunham? Is it Logan Thomas? Is it Keon Keeley? If you want to go a little bit more size, maybe put Keon and Bryce inside, or one of them on the edge and then the linebacker over the guard, which they'll also do to kind of give a little bit of a different look. There's a lot of good options there. I could see Ebenezer Utade later in the year maybe forcing his way into that mix a little bit as well. So I think you'll see different players at different times. I think there may be times where they want to go Tion Gray because they want him to just blow up the center and then blitz a linebacker right off of him, or twist a guy around on him. I think you could see something like that. But if we're just talking pure athleticism, I think Bryce and Boubacar, Kingston, if he's healthy, and then one of Logan Thomas, Ronnie Dunham, Keon Keeley would be, or Ebenezer Utade would be my next one. That's where I'd be.
Agreed. And if they wanted like a pure defensive tackle in with the cheetah package, I'd probably say Jason Onye.
Sure.
Be where I'd go. Irish Guy 99, comparing each position room versus some of our opponents, say BYU. How does Notre Dame stack up at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, O-line, D-line, linebacker, corner, and safety?
Well, we'll kind of do something like this as we get closer to the season. When we actually do our opponent previews, we'll have something like this as part of the opponent preview, because we're doing the team previews now. When we actually do more of opponent preview as we get closer to the season, it won't be let's talk about North Carolina again. It's more talking about Notre Dame stacking up against that team. So we'll dive into that. But BYU, quarterback advantage Notre Dame, running back advantage BYU, and the starter Notre Dame has better depth. Wide receiver advantage Notre Dame, tight end advantage Notre Dame, although that's a close one because I do like Walker Lyons, but I like Notre Dame's depth a little bit better. Starter, though, if we were doing like an all-opponent team or like Notre Dame versus BYU, what's the ultimate starting lineup? Then I'd probably have Walker Lyons based on what we know. That may not hold true. I'd have LJ Martin at running back. Offensive line, I think Notre Dame, has the better offensive line right now. BYU has the more experienced offensive line. So it is a question mark. I mean, and honestly, if I was putting an all-opponent team, I don't know that I could put Ashton Craig at center. I might have to go with Bruce Mitchell. I think Ashton Craig's a more talented player, but I know Bruce Mitchell's going to show up every day.
Yeah.
I think if I was looking at the tackles, honestly, I'd probably go with both of Notre Dame's tackles. But if you're going to say you got to take Andrew Gentry because he's known, I just think the talent gap between Andrew Gentry and Will Black is such that I'm going Will Black. But it'd be hard to put a starter on the bench for a guy like Will Black who's never played before. But definitely Gerby and Lambert's better than either one of their tackles. And I would, as much as we like their guards, I think Anthony Knapp's a more talented player, but there's a lot more experience playing guard there. So it's a close battle. D-line, it's not even close. It's Notre Dame. And honestly, I don't know that there'd be a single guy from BYU starting on Notre Dame's defensive line.
No.
Linebacker it would be in most years would be more competitive, but Notre Dame's just so good. But they're strong at linebacker. Yeah. They're very good at linebacker. With the kids they brought over, it's just that's how good Notre Dame is. Cornerback. Look, if you were putting an all-opponent team, I'd have Leonard Moore and I'd probably have Evan Johnson.
Agreed.
Honestly. And now DJ McKinney may, if DJ plays like he did in 2024, I'm having a different conversation. We're having a much longer conversation. And then safety, it's both the Notre Dame's kids. But my number 3 safety would be BYU's 6. There's several 6'4", 215-pound safeties on the board, and BYU's got on the schedule this year. BYU's got one of them. Not even going to try to pronounce his name. He'd be in my rotation in safety for sure. And then nickel, Christian Gray or Therian Alexander. It's going to be a battle. Christian Gray's more talented. Therian's more consistent and more steady. So that would be my battle there. But look, there's some good football players there. But look, let's be honest, guys. Their roster is not as good as Notre Dame's. It's a good roster. They're a good football team. But it's just not Notre Dame's. It's just not as good as Notre Dame's. So
Agree completely. And I mean, it's not even just specific to BYU. It would be easier to come up with a list where Notre Dame doesn't have the number 1 overall position group versus in the ones that they do. I mean, so that's where I'm at with it. But I'm with you. BYU has talented players. It's just Notre Dame is one of the most talented teams in the country.
Yep. That'll do her.
Folks, that'll do it for us here today in the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, friendly reminder, like we talked about at the start of the show, we don't have one tomorrow. I'm dedicated to coming out with the Irish Breakdown magazine. So Brian and I are going to sit down and we're going to have a lot of meetings, get everything ironed out, and hopefully get that out here sooner rather than later. That's for sure. The guys are going live tonight on IB Nation Sports Beat. I believe Sean Stiers did an interview with Neil Ivey. And then they're also talking about some of the hype that CJ Carr has been garnishing from the Manning Passing Academy. So Brian and I will be back on Thursday. On your way out of this show, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until next time, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.